Chapter 678. Tang Zhang and Marshall hurriedly looked over. There was chaos in front of them and a thick fog shrouded them, making it impossible to see the path ahead clearly. Something's strange, Duan Yen said. Tang Zhang looked at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian smiled mysteriously and said, "Of course not anyone can enter the Imperial Tutor's mansion. I am a guest of the Imperial Tutor's mansion, so of course I have the authority." After he finished speaking, he took out a token and pressed it against the whirlpool. The thick fog began to fluctuate violently, and not long after, a small path appeared beneath his feet. "Do you dare to go in?" Li Xiaotian laughed mischievously. Tang Zhang did not say a word and took the lead to walk in with large strides. In fact, this was just a trick, a type of illusion technique. To Tang Zhang it was not unfamiliar, and it was not that amazing. The key was that Tang Zhang could not predict what kind of danger lay behind the fog. But now that things had come to this, he had no way out. Even if it was a dragon's lair or a tiger's den, he still had to barge in. Marshall followed without hesitation. The corner of Li Xiaotian's mouth hooked up into a meaningful smile, and followed behind the two of them. Not long after, the thick fog gradually dissipated, and the scene in front of them suddenly opened up. A quiet village appeared in front of them. Small bridges, flowing water, green grass, shady trees, blue sky and white clouds. It was as if they had traveled to an ancient paradise. There was no hustle and bustle of modern society, making people feel relaxed and happy. "This is the Imperial Tutor's mansion?" Tang Zhang and Marshall asked in astonishment. "Welcome to the Imperial Tutor's mansion," Li Xiaotian said with a smile. Looking at the sparse houses, Tang Zhang became extremely alert and asked, "Where is the Imperial Tutor?" Li Xiaotian pointed to the deepest part of the village and said, "That small wooden house." Tang Zhang suppressed the emotions in his heart and walked over. Marshall and Li Xiaotian also quickly followed. Li Xiaotian rolled his eyes with suspicion and thought, "Why is it so quiet all around? There's not even a sound, and there's not even a shadow?" She still remembered the various disciples of the Imperial Preceptor's mansion a few days ago, but today, these people seemed to have evaporated into thin air. Something must be wrong when things are out of the ordinary. However, Li Xiaotian didn't say anything. He just silently followed Tang Zhang, ready to go. The cabin was not far away, and it did not take long for the three of them to arrive in front of it. Tang Zhang subconsciously stopped in his tracks. Circulating his zhenqi, Zhang Xian focused his mind and held his breath. His perception increased rapidly. "Ha! Someone!" A strong breathing sound entered his ears clearly. "Be careful, there's someone!" Tang Zhang warned in a low voice. Creak! As soon as he finished speaking, the wooden door was pushed open and a person walked out leisurely. The pupils of the three shrunk as they stared at this person. It was actually Junko, who had used an escape technique to escape. Junko's face had a playful expression as she swept a glance at the three of them and said, "Your speed is really fast. You found this place so quickly." With that, she coldly snorted and changed the topic. She stared at Li Xiaotian and meaningfully said, "You've really sold out our Imperial Preceptor's mansion." Li Xiaotian remained unmoved as he looked at Junko with a frown and remained silent. Junko slightly turned her head and stared at Tang Zhang and said, "Are you really not afraid of death? Are those people that important to you?" Tang Zhang coldly said, "Your scheme is very powerful. I actually watched as the Emperor's substitute died in your hands. But do you think this is the end? Your thinking is too simple. Oh, do you think you can find out the whereabouts of those people by coming here? This is the Imperial Preceptor's mansion, not the Imperial Palace. Do you think you can do whatever you want here?" Junko disagreed as she jokingly said, "Even if I know that this is a dragon's pool and tiger's den, I still have to barge in. Now you won't use an escape technique to escape, right?" Junko's gaze was somewhat strange as she said, "You actually recognized my escape technique. You are indeed a powerful cultivator like the information stated. Since you know this, then hurry up and hand over those people." Marshall took a step forward and said, "If you don't hand them over, then I'll burn your Imperial Preceptor's mansion to ruins just like the Imperial Palace." Creak! As if it heard the word fire, Xiaobai came out from Tang Zhang's backpack and stood on his shoulder. Junko's pupils shrank as she asked, "What kind of animal is this?" Tang Zhang remained unmoved and said, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Hurry up and hand them over." I don't have anyone. But since you've delivered yourself to my door, of course you can't leave. Miss Li, I really have to thank you for leading them here, Junko said with a smile. Li Xiaotian's heart trembled as he suddenly realized. So you knew that I was following you. You deliberately let me follow you and then led them here? Hee hee, if it wasn't for you, how could they obediently enter the trap? This time it's really all thanks to you, Junko said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You. Li Xiaotian flew into a rage. He was actually used as a gun and he didn't even know about it. This kind of situation had always been done by him to others. When had others ever done it to him? He was extremely angry, but he forcefully suppressed his anger. He only stared at Junko like a tiger watching its prey. If you want to keep me, then you have to have the ability to do so. Tang Zheng was alarmed. It turned out that all of this was a trap set by the other party. The Imperial Preceptor's mansion scheme was linked to one another. It was hard to guard against. Even someone as meticulous as Li Xiaotian was not able to see through it. But at this juncture, he couldn't care less about whether or not it was a trap. Since he was in danger, he should make the first move to gain the upper hand. Thus, before he finished speaking, Tang Zheng had already made the first move. With a schwa sound, the War Soul Sword pierced towards the opponent's chest. Now that he was killing an enemy, he didn't show any mercy. The War Soul Sword's brilliant might caused people's hearts to tremble in fear. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew out from the wooden house. Bang! The gust of wind struck the War Soul Sword and Tang Zheng's attack collapsed. He staggered back a step and looked at the dim wooden house in shock. Who? This person actually escaped his perception. When he circulated his energy to sense again, he still found that the wooden house was empty. However, it was clear that there was an expert hidden inside. Could it be the legendary Imperial Preceptor? Tang Zheng and Marshall looked at each other, both of them guessing this point. The Imperial Preceptor was one of the most mysterious people in the island nation. He was also one of the most powerful people. Such an expert was actually living in seclusion in such a small wooden house. Moreover, before he even saw Lu Shan's true face, Tang Zheng was already intimidated by the other party's casual counterattack. This person's strength is definitely something I've never seen before in my life. Tang Zheng came to a conclusion. This Imperial Preceptor was undoubtedly an expert of the Grand Master realm. As for what level of Grand Master he was, it was still impossible to determine. However, Tang Zheng understood that if he was alone, he would definitely not be his match. However, with the 4 symbols venerable by his side, he was much more confident. He took a step forward and said, "Hiding your head and showing your tail, don't you dare to come out and see me?" Junko mocked. "Who do you think you are? Is the Imperial Preceptor someone you can meet just because you want to? Is that so? Then I'll tear down your little hut and see how you're going to hide." Tang Zheng held onto the War Soul Sword with both hands and growled, "Return to origin." He immediately used the 5th move of the Heaven-Flying Immortal, Return to Origin. This was already the pinnacle of the Heaven-Flying Immortal Sword technique that he cultivated. In the blink of an eye, the War Soul Sword became ordinary and fell towards the small wooden hut. Clang! A clear and melodious sound came out from the small wooden hut, as if a sword had been unsheathed. Tang Zheng's expression turned cold, but his Return to Origin sword move was not affected in the slightest. Whiz! With a sound of breaking through the air, a cold light shot out and struck the War Soul Sword. Clang! An intense spark flew in all directions, and the War Soul Sword could no longer fall any further. Taking a closer look, what flew over was actually a sword, but the sword was already covered in dust and was dim. However, when facing the War Soul Sword, it was not at a disadvantage at all, and steadily stopped it. Tang Zheng's eyes bulged, he took a deep breath and changed his sword move. The powerful and heavy Heaven-Flying Immortal's 4th move, Heaven Falls Earth Rends, was unleashed. Clang! The War Soul Sword fiercely slashed onto the nameless sword, causing it to tremble and fall to the ground with a pada sound. Tang Zheng was shaken. The terrifying force that came from the nameless sword was truly not to be underestimated. Let's see what other tricks you have up your sleeve. Tang Zheng once again used his great sword, determined to destroy the small wooden hut. But just as he raised the War Soul Sword, 3 piercing sounds resounded through the clouds, and 3 cold beams of light flew over. Damn! Why are there so many swords? Tang Zheng thought that the sword just now was the other party's sword, But it was obvious that he was wrong. The 3 arrows that flew over were all different. There were long swords, short swords, and heavy swords. It was impossible for a person to use so many swords. However, the lethality of these 3 swords was extremely terrifying. Left, middle, right, 3 directions firmly locked onto Tang Zhang, leaving him with nowhere to dodge. Tang Zhang's expression was solemn. The War Soul sword let out a clear sword cry, buzzing and trembling, as if it was excited to meet an expert. Break! Tang Zhang roared, and in the blink of an eye, he attacked 3 times. Wind rising, clouds surging, sword breaking 1,000 caddies, lightning sparks flint. 3 heaven flying immortal sword technique, 3 completely different offensive sword moves, yet they were perfectly fused together. Ding ding dang dang. Sparks flew in all directions, the 3 different swords were all knocked down, but Tang Zhang also staggered back, his arms trembling, and the War Soul sword almost fell out of his hands. Junko's face changed. She thought to herself, Tang Zhang is indeed powerful, to be able to receive 2 moves of the Imperial Master's 4 swords, but he did not suffer much damage. But so what? It was still impossible for him to be a match for the Imperial Master. Junko was extremely confident. She stood at the door and looked at Tang Zhang in ridicule. Tang Zhang's face turned pale white. Wu immediately asked in a low voice, "How is it?" "The enemy is tricky. Be careful later," Tang Zhang warned, and then patted Xiao Bai's head. "Xiao Bai, act according to the situation later, protect Wu well." A gentle light flashed across Wu Wu's eyes. The words of rejection were about to come out of his mouth, but he swallowed them back down. Li Xiaotian looked at the wooden hut with a complicated expression, not knowing what would happen next. Tang Zhang took another step forward, preparing to launch another attack. No matter how powerful the opponent was, for the sake of the whereabouts of Wu Junshan and the rest, he had to give it his all. Chapter 679. You want to destroy this old man's hut? Heh, this is the dream of many people. However, these people often turn into skeletons in the end, leaving behind only their swords that are buried in my sword tomb. The Imperial advisor's voice was neither fast nor slow, but every syllable was extremely powerful, like a heavy hammer striking one's heart. Sword tomb. Tang Zhang's heart moved. He looked over, and sure enough, there was a huge pit in the dimly lit room, and there were many swords stuck in it. Could it be that those swords just now flew out from the sword tomb? The so-called sword tomb, as the name implied, was the tomb of the sword. According to the Imperial advisor, these swords were all left behind by the people who challenged him after they died, so they were called sword tomb. Not only were these swords buried, it was also equivalent to burying their original owners. He could vaguely tell that there were over 100 swords in the sword tomb, which meant that there were over 100 people with superb swordsmanship who came to challenge him, and in the end, they all lost their lives. After going through hundreds of battles, it should be nothing more than this. Tang Zhang sighed. So what if it's the sword tomb? What's buried are all dead things. How can it bury people? Tang Zhang said with a resounding voice. Heh, then I'll let you die here. Let's see if you can still boast so shamelessly. The Imperial advisor said coldly. Just as his voice disappeared, the sword in the sword tomb started to buzz and tremble, as if it had a life of its own. Tang Zhang's face changed. He kept the War Soul sword and switched to using the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrows. When Li Xiaotian saw the 2 divine armaments, his eyes immediately erupted with a blazing light. He wished that he could immediately snatch them over and take them for himself. Clang clang clang. The sharp swords soared into the air and flew out from the sword tomb. They floated in the air as an invisible force controlled them. So. The sharp swords changed their direction and aimed at Tang Zhang. The sound of them tearing through the air was like 10,000 arrows shooting towards Tang Zhang at the same time. Wang. The bowstring vibrated, and the shooting sun arrow at the tip of his finger left his hand. Boom. Kacha. The shooting sun arrows hit the sharp swords, and the sound of breaking rang out one after another. The first few swords broke into pieces and fell to the ground. However, the attack of the shooting sun arrows dissipated because of these swords, and they fell to the ground with a clatter. Tang Zhang was shocked. Last time in the Kokyo, so many people from the island nation were unable to block the shooting sun arrows. But this time, a single sword was able to wear down the shooting sun arrows. This was enough to show how powerful and domineering the Imperial Tutor's attack was. The attacks of the other swords did not slow down at all. and they continued to fly towards him at lightning speed. Tang Zheng didn't have time to feel sorry for the shooting sun arrow on the ground. He continuously pulled the bowstring and released 2 shooting sun arrows at the same time to meet the overwhelming sharp swords. Boom! 2 loud noises were heard, followed by another cracking sound. Tang Zheng did not have the time to appreciate his own battle achievements as he pulled Wu and quickly moved to the side. The sound of something tearing through the air brushed past their ears, and a few cold lights flew past them. If they were still standing there, their bodies would definitely be pierced through. Without a doubt, the result of this attack was already very clear. Tang Zheng had used 3 shooting sun arrows, and although he had destroyed dozens of his opponent's sharp swords, the Imperial Tutor still controlled the remaining sharp swords and almost killed him. The difference in strength was obvious. Even though Tang Zheng had the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrows, he was still unable to gain the upper hand. This Imperial Tutor is at least at the 6th level of the Grandmaster stage. Tang Zheng guessed with his own experience. For a small country to be able to cultivate to such a level, he could already be considered to have reached the peak. It could also be seen how astonishing his talent was. Meeting such a genius, and a veteran genius at that, Tang Zheng's pressure increased exponentially. Only now did he understand why the Imperial Tutor was so calm and confident. Because the other party did have the ability. Looking at the shooting sun arrows that had fallen to the ground not far away, Tang Zheng was in pain. If this thing fell into the hands of the other party, it would be a huge loss. As if they had a tacit understanding, Xiaobai jumped down from Tang Zheng's shoulder and turned into a white light as it rushed into the house. "Humph, you little thing, do you still dare to come and die?" The Imperial Tutor did not take it seriously at all and said with a murderous aura. The broken sword fragments on the ground rose into the air and turned into specks of cold light, shooting towards Xiaobai from all directions, as if they wanted to turn it into a hedgehog. Xiaobai's eyes flashed with a red light as it squeaked and opened its mouth. Boom! Flames soared into the sky, and the broken sword fragments in all directions were completely enveloped by the flames. They fell to the ground one after another, and some even melted into a pool of molten iron. The flames spread in all directions and quickly ignited the wooden walls. The small house immediately turned into a sea of fire. The Imperial Tutor and Junko obviously did not expect this situation. Junko was stunned, and only the raging flames were left in her eyes. The Imperial Preceptor let out an angry roar. A figure soared into the sky from the flames, and then landed heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. The small wooden house had turned into a sea of fire, and the sword tomb in the center of the sea of fire had also turned into a mess. A white light rushed out of the flames and fell on Tang Zheng's head, and there were 3 shooting sun arrows in its mouth. Tang Zheng patted Xiaobai's head approvingly, and under Li Xiaotian's reluctant gaze, he put away the shooting sun arrows. Then, he looked up and saw a short old man at the edge of the sea of fire. It was the Imperial Tutor. He didn't look like a Grandmaster at all. Instead, he looked like an ordinary old man. He had a thin body and white hair. Even his back was a little stooped, which made his already small body look even smaller and weaker. If they met such a person on the road, many people would even curl their lips in disdain and stay away from him. No one would regard him as a master of a generation. But at this moment, in front of experts like Tang Zheng, the lethality contained in this thin body made them not dare to underestimate him. They even felt a little scared. The Imperial Tutor's eyes were very small, almost narrowed into slits. He stared straight at Tang Zheng and Xiaobai on his shoulder. What kind of demonic beast is this? It can breathe fire and destroy my sword tomb. Tang Zheng patted Xiaobai's head, looked at the Imperial Tutor, and said jokingly, "Didn't you always want to be a coward? Now that your turtle shell has been burned, I want to see how you'll hide your head and show your tail." The Imperial Tutor was unable to restrain his anger. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets, but his eyes suddenly turned and he revealed a mysterious smile. "Tang Zheng, your empty words are useless. So what if my sword tomb is destroyed? With you, I don't need this bluffing sword tomb." The Imperial Tutor's words caused Tang Zheng's expression to change. He asked, "What do you mean?" Li Xiaotian had already guessed the Imperial Tutor's intentions. He suddenly realized, "So you used me as bait to lure them here for Tang Zheng?" "For me?" Tang Zheng was confused. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what he had that was worth coveting. The Imperial Tutor's cultivation was truly very high, far surpassing Tang Zheng's. What could he possibly want? The imperial tutor glanced at Li Xiaotian and sighed. The holy maiden of the Li Palace truly has an outstanding mind. You've so quickly guessed my intentions. Tang Zheng, do you still not understand your own value? Tang Zheng had already faintly guessed a few things. He speculated, the island nation's ninjutsu is only half-baked. It was born from Wuxia's magic. Could it be that you've taken a fancy to my identity as a cultivator and want to dig out the secrets of magic from me? Haha, as expected of an outstanding youth. As expected, you're not an idiot. You've guessed correctly. You're more valuable than anyone else here. Because you're a cultivator, you've systematically learned magic. The island nation's ninjutsu, with the support of the essence of these magic, will rapidly rise, develop, and become even more powerful. The imperial tutor didn't hide anything and admitted without restraint. Tang Zheng's heart jumped. He actually guessed correctly. This imperial tutor really had a good plan. His plan was so far-sighted that it was unexpected. Just like what the imperial tutor had said, if the island nation's ninjutsu had the essence of Wuxia's magic, then there would definitely be a qualitative leap. For such a nation, if they were given the opportunity to increase their strength, then their self-confidence would also increase. In the end, they would definitely bully the weak and even start a war. This was the nature of this nation. Dogs can't change their habit of eating shit. Even if you catch me, I won't reveal half a word to you. Tang Zheng said resolutely. The imperial tutor didn't mind. He faintly smiled and said, you don't need to speak. I have my own ways to know the information in your mind. Tang Zheng was shocked. He immediately remembered the soul-searching technique. This kind of magic wasn't too difficult. There were also many mysterious ninjutsu techniques. Perhaps there was a similar magic to the soul-searching technique. Therefore, as long as Tang Zheng fell into the hands of the imperial tutor, no matter how tight his mouth was, it would be useless. Tang Zheng fiercely stared at the imperial tutor. Looking at the confidence between his eyebrows, Tang Zheng gnashed his teeth in hatred. The opponent's plan was too accurate. One step after another, inviting him to fall into the trap. Tang Zheng unconsciously fell into the trap. Miss Li, when you go back this time, please pass on my gratitude to your palace master. Without you, it would be impossible for me to capture Tang Zheng and complete the great plan that I have dreamed of for so many years. The state preceptor said happily, as if victory was already in his grasp. Li Xiaotian looked at Tang Zheng with a complicated expression. She couldn't help but feel a sense of powerlessness. She had always thought that her plan was flawless. This time, the island nation suffered a fatal Waterloo. The older the wiser. In front of the state preceptor, this old ginger, her scheme seemed a little too immature. Li Xiaotian, you also didn't think that there would be such a result, right? Let me tell you, if he really captured me and let him know the secret of Wuxia's magic and then combined it with ninjutsu, do you think that your martial arts will be a match for his ninjutsu? At that time, when you kill all the cultivators, that will be the time for the island nation to make a comeback. Tang Zheng said jokingly. Li Xiaotian's face was very ugly. She slowly said, I also didn't think that it would turn out like this. She was a little regretful. She was very clear about the ambition of the island nation. There was a huge deviation in the mission that the palace master gave her. She didn't know if the palace master knew the current situation. Chapter 680. At this point, there was no turning back. No matter how much Li Xiaotian regretted, it was useless as he hung his head dejectedly as if he was grieving for his parents. Tang Zheng had already secretly circulated his innate qi and warned Marshall in a low voice. Wait a moment, I will delay the imperial teacher, you escape first. Marshall remained unmoved as she stared straight at the imperial advisor. With a shout, she had already rushed out first. Tang Zheng fiercely stomped his foot. Marshall was good at everything, but she was often impulsive and rushed forward. Wasn't it precisely these qualities that separated her from Li Xiaotian? Both of them were important members of the mysterious organization, but Marshall's straightforwardness was completely different from Li Xiaotian's craftiness. This caused Tang Zheng to unknowingly have a good impression of Marshall and gradually develop hatred towards Li Xiaotian. Marshall rushed forward and closed in on the imperial teacher in the blink of an eye, but the imperial teacher did not even put her in his eyes. How dare you! A graceful figure blocked in front of the imperial teacher as Junko stared at Marshall with a frosty expression. She extended her arm and the autumn water sword was already swinging with sword chi as it pierced towards Marshall. Marshall waved her hand and the roaring flame blade brought forth a string of raging flames. The air surged as she fought fiercely with Junko. The imperial teacher passed by the two and walked straight towards Tang Zheng. He smiled and said, "Don't make any unnecessary resistance, the one who will suffer will be you. If you are willing to submit to me, I can let bygones be bygones. In the future, you will be able to reach a position above millions of people. This is something that many people dream of." "Above millions of people? I'm afraid that I will be below you?" Tang Zheng sneered. "Of course, everyone will be restricted, and you are no exception. However, this is already a supreme power," the imperial teacher said as if it was a matter of course. "You really have an extraordinarily big ambition." Tang Zheng sighed as his guess was not wrong. The imperial teacher had the ambition of a wolf, and was probably no different from those who started the war. The people of the island nation indeed had wild ambitions hidden in their hearts. Once they had the chance, they would unreservedly reveal them. "Thank you for the compliment. This is the long-cherished wish of the island nation's ancestors. Of course, I have the obligation and responsibility to help them achieve it," the imperial tutor said proudly. Tang Zheng gritted his teeth, unable to refute. With a thought he shouted, "Then we'll talk about it after you pass this test." Boom! The gigantic body of the four symbols venerable immediately appeared. Both of its feet landed on the ground, causing the ground to tremble incessantly. Even the nearby stream splashed up. The imperial advisor raised his head to look at the four symbols' lords. His face was slightly astonished as he exclaimed, "Is this the giant that wreaked havoc in the imperial palace? Even missiles can't hurt it. It's really extraordinary." After pausing for a moment, greed flooded the Grand Preceptor's eyes. He stared at the four symbols venerable with scorching light and said, "Wuxia really does have a deep heritage. Even you have the fortune to obtain something so powerful. If I can obtain it, I'll be even more powerful." Tang Zheng's pupils constricted. His opponent was really bold. He was actually thinking about the four symbols venerable again. "Humph, you'll have to have the ability to do so first," Tang Zheng said coldly. The four symbols venerable was his greatest reliance. He had faced many Grandmaster-level experts and was able to escape unscathed all because of the four symbols venerable. However, he could clearly sense that the four symbols venerable was not in its best condition after summoning it this time. A few days ago in the Imperial Palace, the four symbols venerable was hit by missiles. Even Tang Zheng vomited blood. The four symbols venerable was damaged. Later on, Tang Zheng was unable to find a way to completely repair the four symbols venerable, which led to the current sequelae. He had originally planned to properly repair the four symbols venerable after returning to the country. He did not expect to have to use it again so soon. Would the damaged four symbols venerable be able to withstand the imperial advisor? Tang Zheng had no idea. This battle was the most uneasy he had ever been in so many battles. Not only did it concern his personal survival, but it also concerned the lives of martial artists, Wu Junshan, and the others. The weight of the responsibility on his shoulders was unprecedentedly heavy. It was so heavy that he could barely breathe. The imperial advisor was not intimidated by the four symbols venerable. He strode over and said, "Then let me see its battle prowess." Evidently, he was exceptionally confident in his own strength. Tang Zheng jumped onto the four symbols venerable without a word and disappeared into its chest. Xiao Bai also jumped onto the four symbols venerable's shoulder. It bared its teeth at the imperial advisor, its battle intent soaring. The imperial advisor stood with his hands behind his back. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and shot into the air, charging straight at the four symbols venerable. The four symbols venerable dodged nimbly. However, it was too big in the end and could not evade in time. The imperial advisor's foot landed on its chest. Boom! Tang Zheng felt as if an earthquake had struck. He was on the verge of collapsing as a sharp ringing sound in his ears almost tore his eardrums apart. Even though Tang Zheng had expected this, he was still shocked by the might of a single attack. He only cultivated a half-baked ninjutsu. How could he have such power? Tang Zheng was indignant. However, he also understood that it was definitely because the other party's talent was too great. He must be a genius of all kinds. Tang Zheng was not wrong. Everyone in the imperial advisor's residence was very talented. They were all outstanding figures who far surpassed ordinary people. They were geniuses elected by the entire nation. The imperial advisor was a genius among geniuses. It was not hard to imagine how powerful they were. It could be said that Wuxia was lacking in this aspect. There were many sects, each of them fighting openly and covertly. The internal friction was too severe. Island nation had few people and land, but it could not stop the other party's internal and external unity. They used the entire nation's power to cultivate talents. Naturally, their results were extraordinary. Tang Zheng did not have time to sigh because the imperial advisor rushed up again. This time, he did not use the tip of his foot, but his finger aimed at the venerable four symbol's chest. The imperial advisor was very smart. He did not attack the other parts of the venerable four symbols. He understood that the venerable four symbol's body was impenetrable, so he deliberately chose the chest. This was where Tang Zheng had disappeared. The door in the chest was definitely the venerable four symbol's life gate. His choice was correct. When Tang Zheng saw the rapidly approaching finger, he subconsciously placed his fists in front of his chest. Boom! The finger touched the venerable four symbol's fist. A puff of green smoke rose. A white spot was left on the fist as if it had been burned. A white spot. Tang Zheng looked at it in shock, as his heart was in turmoil. The four divine beasts had fought with him so many times, but no matter if it was swords, blades, guns or even missiles, none of them were able to leave a single mark on the four divine beasts. But this time, he had miscalculated. The imperial advisor's seemingly light finger actually left a white spot. It was completely possible to imagine the destructive power contained in that finger. So large and so nimble. What a great treasure. The imperial advisor's thoughts became more and more heated. You can block me once, but can you block me this time? He raised his arm and his expression became abnormally cold. Killing intent filled his body. Tang Zheng guarded his mind and focused all his attention. However, he did not see the imperial advisor's next move. He could not help but feel puzzled. Why was he bluffing like this? Was he trying to show off? Of course not. Li Xiaotian had also been observing the imperial advisor. From his attacks, she came to a shocking conclusion. The imperial advisor's strength was not inferior to Li Palace's palace master, Granny Li. One had to know that Li Palace was one of the three great mysterious organizations. The other clans could not compare. As the master of Li Palace, Granny Li's strength was obvious. However, this bullshit imperial advisor of a small country was actually not inferior to Granny Li. This was too shocking. No wonder he said so confidently that he could deal with Wu Junshan and the others. Looks like he was not lying. But isn't there Lan Yu by Wu Junshan's side? Her cultivation is not inferior to Wu Junshan's. Could it be that the two of them together are still not his match? Li Xiaotian could almost hear the sound of her heart beating because this guess was too shocking. If the imperial advisor was really so powerful, then he could directly kill his way to Wuxia. No one could stop him because he was practically invincible. No, I must be mistaken somewhere. Li Xiaotian hurriedly shook her head, denying this absurd idea. If he was really so powerful, why would he be so obsessed with Tang Zheng's technique? Therefore, there must be some secret behind this that she did not know. However, if he was not so powerful, then how could Wu Junshan and the others fall into his hands? Li Xiaotian felt a headache coming on. Even someone as smart as her could not figure it out. Pang! Suddenly, a loud sound interrupted her thoughts and pulled her back to the real world. She subconsciously turned her head to look. The battle between Junko and Marshall had already reached its climax. Junko had the autumn water sword, which was obviously a treasure sword, causing Junko to be like a tiger that had grown wings. Marshall's roaring flame blade was also very powerful, but after all, it was a pair of hands. Compared to ordinary swords, it was not at a disadvantage. However, in front of the autumn water sword, they would suffer a loss after a long battle. Therefore, Marshall gradually retreated, feeling that it was difficult for him to hold on alone. Li Xiaotian's expression was very ugly. Although she did not get along with Marshall, they were both from Wuxia. Being bullied by an island nation girl like this, she found it difficult to calm down. However, she did not lend a helping hand. The current situation was too delicate. Tang Zheng and Marshall were both at a disadvantage. If she joined the battle, it would be useless. Instead, she would put herself in a dangerous situation. Li Xiaotian was an absolutely calm person. Before doing anything, she had to weigh the pros and cons, hoping to maximize her benefits and reduce the danger. At this moment, it was obviously not a wise decision to lend a helping hand. Suddenly, a trace of splendor appeared in her eyes. She looked at Marshall in disbelief and muttered to herself, "How can this be? What kind of martial arts is this?" At this moment, Marshall had already undergone a huge change. She had already stopped retreating. Her palms flew up as if they had turned into flames. This is definitely not the roaring flame blade. The roaring flame blade is not like this. Li Xiaotian's mouth twitched as she could not help but exclaim. She could clearly feel the power contained within the palms. It was not something the roaring flame blade could compare to. The key point was that she had never heard of such a martial arts technique. This meant that it was not a martial arts technique. Then where did she learn it from? Li Xiaotian's heart was in a mess. Chapter 681. Dark Flame Divine Palm, the martial arts manual that Tang Zhang took out from the first floor of Langya Pavilion. Back then, he took out a total of 2 things from the first floor of Langya Pavilion. In addition to this martial arts manual, there was also a mysterious box. Wu Zue had been immersed in practicing the Inferno Divine Palm for some time now, but she had never used it properly. At this moment, the roaring flame saber was no longer enough to deal with Junko, so she had no choice but to use the Dark Flame Divine Palm. The Dark Flame Divine Palm and the roaring flame saber had something in common. They both cultivated the inner strength to become more overbearing. However, the Dark Flame Divine Palm was clearly superior. This was the understanding that Wu had since she started cultivating. It was precisely because the Dark Flame Divine Palm was too overbearing that it was especially difficult to cultivate. Although she had been cultivating for so long, she had not completely grasped the essence of the Dark Flame Divine Palm. At this point, she could not care so much. She circulated the Dark Flame Divine Palm's mental cultivation method, and her palms immediately turned fiery red as if they had turned into flames. The surrounding air rippled as if it was producing dense qi. Junko's face was cold as she stared at this scene. She knew that the opponent had changed their martial arts. Although they had not exchanged blows yet, she could already tell that this martial arts manual was extraordinary. Junko was not afraid. After all, their cultivation levels were similar. Of course, even if they changed their martial arts, how powerful could it be? The autumn water sword swung through the air and with a sharp sound, it pierced towards Wu. Wu's cheeks also turned crimson. Her entire body seemed to be burning as she pushed her palms forward. Waves of heat rolled as if an invisible flame was gushing out from her palms, wanting to burn everything in the world. Bang! Her palms once again slapped the autumn water sword. The autumn water sword immediately turned fiery red as if it had been melted by the high temperature. Ah! Junko could not help but let out a scream. Her palms felt as if they were on fire and she subconsciously wanted to let go. However, her firm willpower stopped this stupid instinctive impulse. She hurriedly retreated while circulating her inner strength to counteract the heat in her palms. Seeing that the opponent retreated after one strike, without any of the previous aggressiveness, Wu's spirit was greatly aroused. With a low roar, she pounced forward like a fierce tiger descending the mountain. Li Xiaotian was dumbstruck at this scene and muttered to himself, "How can she be so powerful?" Yes, even with her experience, it was hard to imagine that Wu could turn the situation around in the blink of an eye and completely suppress Junko. If it was her, she would definitely not be able to do this. She stared at Marshall's palm with burning eyes and said, "Everything is strange because of the martial arts she cultivates. Who gave her this set of martial arts?" Suddenly, her heart moved, and her eyes turned, locking onto Tang Zheng. Could it be him? He was 100% sure that the martial sect did not have this set of techniques, so with the experience and connections of the martial sect, only Tang Zheng could do this. Isn't he a cultivator? Shouldn't he be holding spells and cultivation manuals? How can he martial arts manual? She was puzzled. Of course, she did not expect that the dragon seal on Tang Zheng's forehead could directly reach a treasure trove like Langya Pavilion. Li Xiaotian could not help but feel a trace of jealousy. Back then, she had been in contact with Tang Zheng for more days than Wu. Furthermore, they had gone through trials and tribulations together in the 10,000 mountains. If she did not become enemies with him because of his identity as a cultivator, then wouldn't this martial arts manual be hers? At that moment, she was a little jealous of Wu. How could Wu have such good luck? She came from behind and obtained such a huge benefit. She had mixed feelings, but she quickly threw these emotions out of her mind. That was because the battle between Tang Zhang and the imperial tutor had undergone a drastic change. The imperial tutor raised his arm even higher. Tang Zhang had not figured out the other party's intentions, but Li Xiaotian had already seen some clues. She looked at the stream behind the imperial tutor in shock. The stream seemed to be controlled by a terrifying force and had already stopped flowing. Crash! The stream suddenly soared into the air, turning into droplets of water. The droplets passed by the imperial tutor and shot straight towards the four symbols venerable. The water droplets condensed into lines that were like thousands of sharp swords. Thousands of swords shot out at the same time, slashing towards the four symbols venerable. The four symbols venerable's huge body had nowhere to hide. Tang Zhang also instantly realized the other party's intentions. Too powerful, he actually managed to draw the stream's water into swords. The four symbols venerable hurriedly placed one hand in front of his chest to protect himself. His other hand clenched into a fist and punched out. The air crackled like a sudden clap of thunder as a shockwave was sent forward. Boom! 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 The shockwave struck the water swords, which immediately turned into droplets of water that scattered down. However, there were still some water swords that slipped through the net and ruthlessly slashed at the four symbols venerable's chest and arm. Sword after sword. The huge force caused the four symbols venerable to almost lose his balance. His huge body was on the verge of collapse. Tang Zhang could clearly sense the rumbling coming from the four symbols venerable's chest. It was like a sledgehammer had struck his arm, but it was also clearly transmitted through his arm to his chest. Heh, you can block it once, but can you block it a second time or a third time? Doesn't your Wuxia have a saying that dripping water penetrates a stone? Today I can test this saying, the imperial tutor proudly said, a faint and savage smile appearing on his face. Dripping water penetrates a stone. Tang Zhang was shaken. Wasn't the imperial tutor planning to use the soft to conquer the hard? Dripping water penetrates a stone was not a legend. If the imperial tutor was allowed to continue his attacks, it was unknown whether this seemingly invulnerable four symbols venerable would be able to endure. Li Xiaotian had clearly seen this point, and her eyes grew more and more complicated. At this moment, Tang Zhang's defeat was of no benefit to her. The imperial tutor was clearly more ambitious than Tang Zhang, and also more skilled at scheming. If the imperial tutor grew stronger, it would definitely do more harm than good to Wuxia and the Li Palace. Previously, she had been prepared to remain uninvolved, but the appearance of the Inferno Divine Palm made her realize that Tang Zhang was a massive treasure trove. If it fell into the imperial tutor's hands for nothing, it would be letting the imperial tutor own this treasure trove, which would be letting him off too easily. Lend a hand to Tang Zhang. A voice emerged from the bottom of her heart. But she did not rashly attack. The imperial tutor was too powerful, and with her meager abilities, the slightest carelessness would result in her being beheaded. She did not believe that at this crucial moment, the imperial tutor would care about her status as the holy maiden of the Li Palace. She stared at the battle, searching for an opportunity to strike. The four symbols venerable had already become a drowned rat. Its entire body was soaked, and even Xiao Bai on its shoulder was soaked. It fiercely shook its thin and small body, sending droplets of water into the air. It grinned and let out a long squeak. Tang Zheng knew that it was truly enraged, so he shouted, "Xiao Bai, attack!" In order to break the imperial tutor's attempt to break through the stone with dripping water, he could only use Xiao Bai as an elite force. Xiao Bai obeyed, and its squeak suddenly became sharp and resounding. It raised its head and expanded its chest, its small mouth raised high. Its eyes turned fiery red, and the droplets of water on its body instantly evaporated. Boom! A fireball was spat out of its small mouth. However, this fireball did not rapidly fly forward. Instead, it floated in front of the four symbols venerable, constantly spinning as it absorbed the surrounding air. Gradually, the fireball began to grow at a visible rate. Fiery red replaced the color in front of it, and as far as the eye could see, everything was fiery red. When the water swords struck this ball of fire, they immediately evaporated into water vapor, finding it difficult to harm the four symbols venerable in the slightest. The imperial tutor's expression flickered at this sight, and he angrily said, "A little brat wants to influence the battle?" Dang! Swoosh! Thousands of water swords suddenly condensed into a line, forming a gigantic water sword. With the stream as the source, it slashed at the fireball. Squeak! Whitey raised its neck and cried out loudly. Its snow-white fur immediately underwent an earth-shattering change, completely turning into a fiery red color. It was as if it had turned into a ball of fire. Boom! The water sword slashed at the fireball. Sparks and water splattered in all directions, overflowing with light and color. It was extremely beautiful. However, this beauty contained an earth-shattering danger. It was evident from the surrounding vegetation that was hit by the water droplets and sparks. The vegetation looked as if it had been shot by a machine gun, and was in a complete mess. If a person was hit, the outcome would not be much better. The Imperial Tutor's expression was a little strange. He suddenly pointed his finger forward, and the stream water bubbled and boiled, quickly adding into the water sword. The fireball was sent flying backwards, almost crashing into the body of the four symbols venerable. Immediately, the Imperial Tutor revealed a smug look and said, "Now you know what it means to be a mantis trying to stop a chariot, right?" Xiaobai ignored the Imperial Tutor's mockery. It yelled and leaped off the four symbols venerable's shoulder, crashing straight into the ball of fire. Xiaobai! Tang Zheng turned pale with fright and could not help but cry out. He had never seen Xiaobai use this move as if he was facing a great enemy. He did not know what this move meant, or if there was any danger. Seeing Xiaobai being engulfed by the flames, Tang Zheng was also enraged. He roared at the top of his lungs, "I'll fight it out with you." He took a deep breath, and true qi began to circulate wildly in his veins. In an instant, the air around his body began to vibrate, and his bones began to crackle. His hair and beard stood on end, and he looked like a mad lion. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the Imperial Tutor. Kachak! Tang Zheng clenched his fists so tightly that his fingernails almost sank into his flesh. At the same time, the four symbols venerable also clenched his fists and stomped his feet on the ground. The stone slabs on the ground immediately cracked and shattered into pieces. Kill! Tang Zheng roared furiously. The four symbols venerable's huge body was like a cannonball that had been fired, charging straight at the Imperial Tutor. The four symbols knight passed through the fireball and the water sword and charged directly at the Imperial Tutor's body. Two huge fists were like two meteors flying from outer space. They whistled through the air and smashed directly at the Imperial Tutor's head. The Imperial Tutor's expression changed drastically. He could deal with Tang Zheng with ease because he was fully focused on attacking. At the moment, he was fully focused on the water sword, but he dared not underestimate Tang Zheng's frenzied attacks. Chapter 682. The four symbols venerable rushed in front of the state preceptor. The state preceptor crossed his hands, and a broken sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Yes, he was holding a broken sword in his hand. As if facing a great enemy, he frowned. He raised the broken sword in his hand high and casually slashed at the four symbols venerable. Boom! The water sword exploded and was turned into water vapor by the fireball, disappearing without a trace. The ball of flame trembled and fell to the ground. The flame was extinguished, revealing Xiaobai's thin body. Its fur turned snow-white again, and the spirit in its eyes had clearly weakened. It looked at the back of the four symbols venerable and grinned, as if saying that it had done its best. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the four symbols venerable's huge fist had already reached the state preceptor's head. The powerful pressure caused the ground to cave in, and the state preceptor fell into the pit, drowning his short figure. Clang! Suddenly, the broken sword rose from the pit and collided with the huge fist. The soil around the pit immediately flew out as if it had been affected by a huge shock wave. Tang Zheng clenched his teeth and pressed his fist down a little, completely sealing the top of the pit and burying the state preceptor in it. State preceptor! Seeing this, Junko let out a heart-wrenching scream, and her movements involuntarily slowed by half a beat. She had been forced to retreat step by Wu, and was surrounded by dangers. Now that her movements were half a beat slower, Wu immediately seized this rare opportunity. Bang! The Inferno Underworld palm imprinted on Junko's chest, and she flew back like a kite with a broken string. She crashed into the stream, splashing water droplets all over the sky. Wu took advantage of the opportunity to give her a fatal blow, but when she caught up to Junko, she saw her fingers moving, forming a complicated hand seal. Junko revealed a strange smile to Wu, and in the next second, she disappeared. Escape technique. Wu fiercely stomped her foot. She was still a step too late. Junko had this strange escape technique, so it was easier said than done to kill her. She hurriedly turned her head to look in the direction of Tang Zheng. The guardian of four symbols' giant fist had already sealed off the crater. There was no movement in the crater, as if the Grand Preceptor had been suffocated to death. What's going on? Tang Zheng frowned and carefully moved the four symbols' venerable's fist away. Ha! The crater was empty. Not even a shadow could be seen. Shit! Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat, and he cursed in his heart. The Imperial Preceptor had also used the Earth Escape technique, and it was obvious that he had long escaped from the huge pit. But he definitely wouldn't run away. This was his headquarters. Tang Zheng suddenly had an ominous premonition and subconsciously turned his head to look. His pupils involuntarily widened as he screamed, "Wu, be careful behind you!" Wu Jingran was shocked, and slapped backwards with his palm. The Fire Underworld Divine Palm was more than enough to deal with Junko. But after all, Wu Jingran had not cultivated the Fire Underworld Divine Palm to the peak. Therefore, this seemingly tyrannical palm did not cause any waves, and was easily dissolved by the Imperial Preceptor behind him. The Imperial Preceptor had used the Earth Escape technique to escape behind Wu Jingran, and then took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. How could Wu Jingran be his opponent? Wu Jingran fell into the Imperial Preceptor's palm, and the broken sword was placed on her neck, forming a sharp contrast with her white and tender skin. The Imperial Preceptor's head popped out from behind Wu Jingran, and he clicked his tongue and said, "Tang Zheng, you are really powerful, far beyond my expectations. Whether it is you, this huge monster, or that little guy, you have all broadened my horizons." Imperial Preceptor, what are you doing? Tang Zheng was unable to restrain his anger as he asked. Hey, don't you know what I want to do? If you obediently surrender, then I will let her go. Otherwise, I will let you watch her die. In any case, she is of no use to me. If I kill her, then kill her. It is not a pity at all. The Imperial Advisor said with a murderous aura, as if the broken sword in his hand could cut Wu's throat at any time. You! Tang Zheng was flustered and exasperated, but he was speechless. This was a battlefield, cruel, and the slightest mistake would cause the situation to take a turn for the worse. However, in the end, Tang Zheng did not expect that the Imperial Preceptor, a Grandmaster of a generation, would actually use someone else to threaten Tang Zheng. This was not the bearing of a Grandmaster of a generation. Obviously, the Imperial Preceptor was a person who was guided by his goals. As long as he could achieve his goals, the process and methods were not important. I will count to 3. If you don't come out from there, I will immediately kill her in front of you. The Imperial Preceptor threatened. Without a doubt, he was not bluffing, so Tang Zheng did not dare to be careless and immediately shouted, "No, I'll come out. Don't worry about me." Wu shouted loudly. "Be good, you can't die." Tang Zheng advised. "If you come out, both of us will die. But I can't watch you die without doing anything. Then I'll die immediately. You don't have to be threatened anymore," Marshall said resolutely. Then, with a tilt of his neck, he slashed towards the broken sword. "Haha, are you courting death? It's not that easy." The Imperial Preceptor tapped on Marshall's body, and her acupoints were immediately sealed. She could no longer move and could not even commit suicide. Marshall could not help but reveal a look of despair as he roared with a heart-wrenching voice, "If you have the guts, then kill me." Hee, if Tang Zheng doesn't do as I say, I will definitely kill you without hesitation. The Imperial Preceptor said with a smile, "I'll start counting 1. As soon as this number came out, Tang Zheng immediately jumped out of the Four Symbols Venerable's body and shouted, "Don't kill her, I'm out." When he jumped down from the Four Symbols Venerable, he immediately put him into the Sumeru pouch. Seeing that, the Imperial Preceptor's eyes immediately burned with passion. He sized up Tang Zheng from head to toe like a monster looking at Tang Zheng's meat, wishing that he could immediately pounce on him and eat him. "Why are you doing this? For me, it's not worth it." Marshall's emotions were extremely complicated. He was both regretful and moved. If he did not drag him down, then Tang Zheng would not have been threatened. At this moment, she hated herself to the core. She had never hated herself so much before. She was too useless and would only drag him down. Why didn't she just die? Tang Zheng forced a smile. How could I just watch you die? What's so scary about death? At most, I'll accompany you. Marshall's emotions rose and fell. His eyes became moist, and he really had the urge to cry. In this world, other than master and mistress, no one had ever treated her so well. They didn't even care about their own lives for her. If I have a next life, I'll still be your woman. She silently made up her mind in her heart. In this life, she had already decided to follow Tang Zhang, and that was to be his woman. Even though this was a promise she had made to Tang Zhang. But at this moment, her heart had completely melted. She was truly devoted to him. Not only in this life, but also in the next life, she wanted to chase after him and be his woman. Marshall didn't know much about love, but there was one thing she understood very well. If a person was willing to risk his life for her, then she would be willing to follow him wholeheartedly. All of this was so simple. There weren't so many reasons, nor were there so many grand things about love. Simple, direct, straightforward. When Li Xiaotian saw this scene, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous of Marshall. Her thoughts were even more meticulous than Marshall, but she also understood how difficult it was for a man to sacrifice his life for a woman. This kind of thing was almost extinct. But Wu's luck was too good. He had met someone like Tang Zheng just like that. She was a little annoyed and felt that she was a little pitiful. She had schemed and schemed everywhere, but in the end, what she got was far less than a careless and foolish woman like Wu. No, I want more. If others have it, I want it too. If others don't have it, I want it too. Li Xiaotian silently clenched his fists. Heh, it's truly moving. You're actually willing to give up your life for her. The imperial advisor laughed in surprise and said disdainfully, "Is this the love that you young people are talking about? Haha, love is just a superfluous thing. It will only make people emotional and turn them into fools. In the end, the one who will suffer is themselves." Tang Zheng didn't know if this was love, but one thing was certain. For her, Marshall did not hesitate to take the risk and forcefully charge into the imperial palace to save him. At the same time, he could do the same. Was this love? He didn't care what it was. What he wanted to do was to find every opportunity to save Marshall from the imperial advisor's hands. Wu Mingliang blinked her eyes. The word love made her heart beat violently. She couldn't help but ask herself, was this really love? Love, what an ethereal thing. She had never hoped for it, nor even thought about it. She stared straight at Tang Zheng, as if she wanted to discern the answer from his face. But Tang Zheng didn't have the mood to think about this. He walked towards the imperial advisor with large strides, but in the end, he stopped a few meters away. The imperial advisor frowned and scolded. "What are you stopping for? Do you want her to die?" Tang Zheng remained unmoved and said resolutely, "I know what you want the most." He pointed to his own head. "You want the knowledge in my mind, but if I die immediately, do you think you have a way to take these things out of a dead person's head? What do you mean?" The imperial advisor had a bad premonition and hurriedly asked. Tang Zheng revealed a brilliant smile. His two neat rows of snow-white teeth were extremely beautiful, giving Marshall a dazzling feeling, causing his heart to palpitate. "Although I can't control you, I can control myself. If I were to commit suicide immediately, would you still be able to get what you want?" The state preceptor's eyes suddenly widened as he shouted, "Stop!" Obviously, he didn't expect Tang Zheng to be so ruthless to him and even dare to kill him. This was a trait that almost no one possessed. "Whether or not you stop depends on you." Tang Zheng's smile was still clean and bright, like sunlight shining into the bottom of Marshall's heart. Her heart seemed to melt as tears welled up in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had never shed tears for a man. In fact, she had never shed tears at all. No matter how difficult the situation was, she would grit her teeth and endure it. Chapter 683. The imperial tutor had already guessed Tang Zheng's intentions and said, "You want me to let her go?" "Smart," Tang Zheng praised. "But if I let her go, wouldn't you regain your freedom?" The imperial tutor said unwillingly. Tang Zheng smiled but did not say anything. It was obvious that he had the imperial tutor in his grasp. The state preceptor's small eyes narrowed into slits as he stared at Tang Zheng, his eyeballs rolling around in circles. Suddenly he said in a clear voice, "All right, I promise you, let her go." Tang Zheng was overjoyed. The move that he came up with in a hurry was indeed effective. But before he could be happy, he heard the imperial tutor continue, "But I am not an idiot. I will let you go." "What do you mean?" Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched. The imperial tutor's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness as he grabbed Wu's neck with his 5 fingers. She had no choice but to open her mouth, and a pill was immediately sent into her mouth. Tang Zheng turned pale with fright and said, "What did you feed her?" "I don't trust you, so of course I have to leave a backup plan." The imperial tutor said sternly, "She ate the heart-devouring pill. If there is no antidote, her heart will be devoured and she will die from bleeding from her 7 orifices." Tang Zheng's face was ashen as he gritted his teeth and said, "You are too ruthless." "Hee. Thank you for the compliment. However, as long as you obediently tell me what I want, she will not die. I will give her the antidote." Tang Zheng's anger surged out. The imperial tutor was indeed an old fox. He was actually able to counter every move and grab onto Tang Zheng's life. "Don't use your life to threaten me. If you still want to play tricks, I won't take the things in your mind. According to my information, you are not the only cultivator in Wuxia. The cultivators are already gradually rising. It won't be too difficult for me to find someone to replace you." Tang Zheng already had no way out. "All right, then let her go first. I'll go over and let you do whatever you want with me." Tang Zheng walked towards the state preceptor again. The state preceptor unsealed Wu's acupoints and smiled as he released his hand and said, "Sure." Wu regained his freedom, his eyes filled with tears. He kept shaking his head and said, "No, why are you so stupid? I am not worth your life." Tang Zheng took 2 steps forward and arrived in front of Wu, pulling her over. Wu threw himself into her embrace and sobbed, "I won't allow you to go over. Don't go over. My life is not worth you paying so much." Tang Zheng caressed her tear-stained cheeks and revealed a brilliant smile. "Don't be silly. You have to live well and live on strong." Wu looked at him. The 2 of them were about the same height. Their eyes met, full of affection. She shook her head like a rattle drum and said resolutely, "Without you, can I still live in this world?" Tang Zheng's face turned cold and said, "Be good, don't let my sacrifice go to waste. You have to take good care of my grandfather in the future." This time, Tang Zheng was determined to die, because this time, there would no longer be a miracle. The gap between him and the state preceptor was too great. It was like a chasm that could not be bridged. Moreover, Wu's life was in the hands of the state preceptor, so he had no room to resist. If Tian Chanzi was here, he would definitely scold him for being muddle-headed. How could he give up his life for a woman? This was too muddle-headed, too unwise. But Tang Zheng was not Tian Chanzi. He had his own principles and bottom line. If Wu could give up his life for her, then he could do the same. If you still want her to live, then don't be so wishy-washy. The state preceptor impatiently urged. Tang Zheng pushed Marshall away, causing Marshall to shake her head in pain, but seeing the determination in Tang Zheng's eyes, she understood that there was no turning back. Things had already reached this point, and the wood had already become a boat. She choked with sobs, looked into Tang Zheng's eyes and said firmly, "I will definitely take good care of grandfather." With that, he raised his face and kissed Tang Zheng on the lips. Like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, it separated with a single touch. However, it was as if they had been electrocuted. Their eyes met and they could see something different in each other's eyes. The 2 of them had already had skin-to-skin contact, but this simple kiss contained a deep affection that far surpassed the previous intimate contact between the 2 of them. This was because the 2 of them had completely different states of mind. Tang Zheng pulled Wu back and resolutely walked towards the state preceptor. The state preceptor's face was filled with excitement as he clenched his fists tightly together. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Suddenly, the sound of something tearing through the air broke his good mood. A sharp arrow flew through the air and shot towards him. The arrow shone with a cold light, containing an extremely great power. The state preceptor recognized this arrow. Wasn't this the arrow that Tang Zheng had used earlier? But didn't Tang Zheng not make the slightest movement? Where did this arrow come from? He immediately turned his head to look in the direction of the arrow and saw a familiar person, Li Xiaotian. She was holding an iron bow and aiming it at him. The state preceptor was furious. This little girl actually dared to attack him. He had let her go because of the Li Palace, but she still had the guts to do so. The state preceptor was furious. The broken sword in his hand immediately slashed towards the sun-shooting arrow. Clang! The sun-shooting arrow shot towards the ground, unable to harm the state preceptor in the slightest. Humph! You dare to make a fool of yourself with such insignificant skills. Even if you are the holy maiden of the Li Palace, you can forget about leaving this place today. The state preceptor roared and reached out to grab Tang Zheng. The situation had changed and he did not want the cooked duck to fly away. As long as Tang Zheng fell into his hands, even if Tang Zheng wanted to commit suicide, he would not be able to do so. Then his goal would have been achieved. But things did not go as he wished. The heavens were not helping him. Just as he reached out, the sun-shooting arrow on the ground flew up again and shot towards his chest. This unforeseen event shocked him. He had never expected that the sun-shooting arrow, which had lost its threat, would suddenly fly up again. With Li Xiaotian's cultivation, he did not have the ability to control an arrow through the air. But the facts were the best proof. There was no room for falsehood. The threat of the sun-shooting arrow shooting towards his chest multiplied, making it impossible for him to ignore it. He couldn't even raise his broken sword to block it. Retreat! He only had this one path. Thus, he retreated. With this retreat, the distance between him and Tang Zheng was once more widened. A person appeared between him and Tang Zheng like a whirlwind, grabbing Tang Zheng's hand and urgently shouting, "Let's go!" This person was Li Xiaotian. Tang Zheng hesitated. Marshall's life was still in the hands of the state preceptor. If he left just like that, wouldn't Marshall not be able to live? Moreover, how could Li Xiaotian be so kind as to save him? Could it be another conspiracy? He really felt a little scared. Li Xiaotian's cunning image had already entered his heart and he did not dare to believe it so easily. Li Xiaotian only took a glance at him and saw through his thoughts. He immediately said, "I'm here to save you. I have a way to save Marshall." Hearing that, Tang Zheng no longer hesitated. He turned around and ran. At the same time, he grabbed Marshall's hand. Like a headless fly, he ran away with large strides. Li Xiaotian angrily stomped his feet, cursing in his heart. "You ran faster than me, but you still foolishly sent yourself to death. What a complete idiot." She also hurriedly chased after him. The three of them ran as fast as lightning. Seeing this, the state preceptor was so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices. He shouted loudly, "Stop right there, I will kill all of you. None of you will be left alive." The three of them were not idiots, so they did not stop. Instead, they ran even faster, and the sun-shooting arrow had long since been taken back by Li Xiaotian. The state preceptor had already discovered that the tail of the sun-shooting arrow had a thin thread that was hard to see with the naked eye. That was why Li Xiaotian was able to control it from afar and catch him off guard. This is the Imperial Preceptor's mansion. There are formations set up by the Imperial Preceptors. Let's see where you can run to. The state preceptor was not in a hurry to chase after them because he believed that the thick fog could trap the three of them. They had already arrived at the narrow path that they came in from. In front of them was the thick fog. Li Xiaotian followed the pattern and pressed a command medallion into the whirlpool. Originally, the dense fog should have dissipated and an exit should have appeared. However, this time, there was no reaction at all. Tang Zheng secretly cursed and said, "Your command medallion has lost its effectiveness. Haha, you guys run. In this Imperial Preceptor's mansion, without my permission, you guys won't be able to fly out even if you have wings." The state preceptor laughed sinisterly. The three of them looked at each other in dismay. At the last moment, such a situation had occurred. Could it be that the heavens wanted them to die? However, the three of them were not people who would give up so easily. Seeing that the state preceptor had caught up, the three of them turned around and rushed to the side. Hee. Continue to run. Once you're exhausted, you won't need me to do anything. The state preceptor said calmly. Whoosh whoosh, the wind whistled in their ears. The three of them did not dare to stop and rushed forward with all their might. Suddenly, a bamboo forest appeared in front of him. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. With an obstacle, he could effectively delay the state preceptor. Thus, without any hesitation, he pulled Wu's hand and took the lead to rush into the bamboo forest. When Li Xiaotian saw the bamboo forest, a thought flashed through his mind. He immediately realized where he was and subconsciously stopped in his tracks. he blurted out. "Don't go in." However, it was already too late. Tang Zhang and Wu rushed in without hesitation, completely ignoring her words. She stomped her feet hatefully and said, "A dog biting Lu Dongbin, you don't know how to appreciate kindness. I can be considered to have been killed by you guys." Turning her head to look, the state preceptor had already caught up. She did not dare to stay any longer. With a gust of wind under her feet, she also rushed into the bamboo forest. This bamboo forest was of course the sword forest that had caused her to suffer a loss. That was why she was so afraid. She was very clear that there were too many strange things in this sword forest, and this was also an important place in the state preceptor's mansion. If she were to barge in, wouldn't she be like a sheep walking into a tiger's den, walking right into a trap? However, Tang Zheng's actions made her unable to think about all of this. She chased after them as fast as lightning. Looking at the two of them holding hands, she felt that it was especially dazzling. Thus, she said snappily, "Are you guys courting death? This is the sword forest of the state preceptor's mansion. If we rush in, what if we encounter danger?" "Sword forest?" Tang Zheng raised his thick eyebrows. "What do you mean?" Chapter 684. Sword Forest, if you barge in, you won't be able to leave? Tang Zheng subconsciously thought of the array formation outside the witch tribe in the 10,000 huge mountains. Didn't it also cause people to lose their way? This is definitely a type of array formation. It's just that you're not proficient in these things, so you lost your way. Tang Zheng said solemnly. "You have a way?" Tang Zheng did not say too much, and said, "Let's take one step at a time. In any case, it's much better than facing the Imperial Advisor." Li Xiaotian thought about it and agreed. The Imperial Advisor would not let them go, although they would lose their way in the Sword Forest. But wasn't there still Tang Zheng? His identity as a cultivator might be able to turn danger into safety. "Marshal, how are you feeling?" Tang Zheng turned his head to look, but did not see any trace of the Imperial Advisor, so he asked with concern. "I'm fine." Marshal's breathing was somewhat hurried. His face flushed red. Tang Zheng touched her forehead and said, "Your forehead is so hot." "Li Xiaotian, didn't you say that you have the antidote?" A trace of panic flashed across Li Xiaotian's eyes, and he stammered, "No." "What?" Tang Zheng turned pale with fright. "You actually lied to me again." Tang Zheng was so angry that his eyes widened. This Li Xiaotian really did not change his nature. He actually lied to him at this critical moment. Furthermore, this concerned Marshal's life. "You!" Tang Zheng's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He fiercely grabbed onto Li Xiaotian's collar. "You want to kill you?" Li Xiaotian squeezed out a smile and said jokingly, "I saved you, but you want to kill me. Is this how you repay me for saving your life? You are harming Wu's life. If I don't kill you, do I have to thank you?" Tang Zheng was furious. He blamed himself for being too naive to actually believe her nonsense. Li Xiaotian was not afraid and continued, "Do you think that if you hand yourself over to the Imperial Advisor, he will really give Wu the antidote? You're too naive. What kind of person is the state preceptor? How could he just watch her leave? Both of you are already on his death list. He's just trying to trick you into submission." Tang Zheng was slightly startled. He had also thought of this at that time, but for that slim chance of survival, he had to take this risk. He had no other choice. "Looks like you know this as well. You're just deceiving yourself. If I hadn't deceived you, would you have obediently turned around and fled? For her, you will definitely continue to hand yourself over to the state preceptor without hesitation. At that time, both of you will be finished, and the state preceptor will be the final winner. Do you really want to see this scene?" Li Xiaotian continued to chatter. Tang Zheng was speechless. "If you want to kill me, then kill me. In any case, I'm not your match. However, in the future, others will say that you, Tang Zheng, are ungrateful and actually want to kill your own savior." Li Xiaotian pretended to be carefree and said. Tang Zheng's expression kept changing as he glared fiercely at Li Xiaotian. His gaze was as if he wanted to cut her into 1,000 pieces. Li Xiaotian, however, was not afraid at all. He raised his head and stared at him with a burning gaze. Tang Zheng was in a mess. He really didn't know what to do. Without the antidote, wouldn't Wu's life be in danger? If he went out and surrendered now, Would he be able to exchange for the antidote? He immediately rejected this absurd idea. Forget about what the state preceptor was thinking at the beginning. With the state preceptor's personality, how could he give him the antidote? Therefore, this had already become a dead end. Suddenly, a hand was placed on Tang Zheng's arm. Marshall looked at him affectionately, shook his head and said, "Don't kill her. She did the right thing. You can't sacrifice yourself for me." Tang Zheng was about to refute when Marshall's finger pressed down on his lips and continued, "Don't say it, I understand. This is fate. I accept it." After saying that, he turned to stare at Li Xiaotian and said, "Although I hate you, I have to thank you this time. Thank you for helping me out just now, so that everything can still be salvaged and not slipping into an irreparable abyss." Li Xiaotian laughed. "Tang Zheng, it seems that women are more reasonable than you." Tang Zheng coldly snorted, and hatefully released his fingers. Li Xiaotian regained his freedom, tidied up his clothes and said, "Let's not be in a hurry to blame who is right and who is wrong. Leaving this place first is the most important thing." Tang Zheng turned a deaf ear and asked Marshall gently, "Can you hold on?" "I'm fine," Marshall said quickly. Tang Zheng frowned and grabbed Marshall's hand. What kind of person was Marshall? She was a pre-celestial martial artist, so the running just now definitely wouldn't cause her breathing to become so chaotic. There must be a problem. "I'm fine." Marshall wanted to break free from Tang Zheng's hand, but his hand was like a vice. How could she break free? She was very clear about the situation with her body. In fact, she had already felt that something was wrong. There was a faint pain in her chest, and she was unable to breathe. This kind of situation had never happened before, so it was obvious that the heart-devouring pill had begun to take effect. The Imperial advisor said that after the heart-devouring pill took effect, it would devour her heart, causing her to bleed to death from all 7 orifices. She was not afraid of death, but she did not want to drag Tang Jing down, nor did she want him to see her miserable death. She hoped that the image she left in Tang Zheng's eyes was beautiful. "Don't move, let me check." Tang Zheng channeled his innate qi, and threads of innate qi flowed along her meridians towards her body. When the innate qi reached her chest, Tang Zheng couldn't help but feel a bit of heartache, because he could clearly see the scar on her chest, which was caused by the Fire King of the Dragon Group in the Northwest Desert. Not only her chest, but her hands were also injured by the flames, leaving behind scars. Tian Chanzi had once said that this kind of scar could be removed bit by bit with innate qi, but it was not a short period of time. After Marshall obtained the Fire Underworld Palm, he was engrossed in cultivation and did not come to Tang Zheng to remove the scar. Therefore, after delaying again and again, she still had this shocking scar on her body. Seeing the strange expression on Tang Zheng's face, Wu immediately guessed what she was thinking. He subconsciously looked at his chest, as if he could see the ugly scar through his clothes. He couldn't help but feel embarrassed. As the innate qi flowed, it immediately made a new discovery. Tang Zheng's heart couldn't help but tighten, as if it was being ruthlessly grabbed by someone. How could this be? Outside her heart, there was a black thing wriggling, as if it had a life of its own. It extended its tentacles and attached itself to her heart. Every time her heart beat, dark red blood would flow along those tentacles to that black thing. What the hell is this? Tang Zheng turned pale with fright, as this scene was too shocking for him. What's wrong? Seeing Tang Zheng's ashen face, Wu asked curiously. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, "Nothing, don't move." Tang Zheng could conclude that this thing was caused by the heart-devouring pill. The Imperial advisor said that he could devour her heart, and it seemed that what he said was true. This damn thing was not just absorbing the blood from her heart bit by bit. It was not impossible for it to devour her heart in the future. That thing was alive, which made Tang Zheng think of a legendary spell, the Gu Technique. The Gu Technique was a very mysterious spell. Even in the original cultivation world, very few people knew this spell, and those who were proficient in it were even rarer. Just now, the heart-devouring pill must have contained a Gu worm. When Wu consumed it, the Gu worm was awakened and attached itself to her heart. If there was no antidote, the Gu worm would completely awaken and then slowly devour Wu's heart, completely killing her. In addition, if the Gu technique was cultivated to the extreme, one could use these Gu worms to control a person's consciousness and use them as puppets. The state preceptor's heart-devouring pill obviously doesn't have the ability to control the host, but it's not difficult to kill her. Damn, the Imperial Preceptor's mansion actually has such a weird thing. It seems that ninjutsu is not completely useless. In the past, the island nation stole a lot of good things from Wuxia. Tang Zheng thought indignantly. Even so, he did not intend to compromise. He was prepared to try and see if he could help her get rid of this damned thing. Hearing that, Wu's body slightly stiffened. He took a deep breath and held his breath as he looked deeply at Tang Zheng. He knew that he was going to heal her. Her true qi flowed to the outside of the cluster of goo worms. Suddenly, the goo worms shook as if they were stimulated. Those tentacles quickly grew and drilled into her heart. Ah! Wu's facial muscles immediately contorted as he screamed in pain. Beads of sweat dripped down from his forehead like rain. Tang Zheng was shocked and quickly asked, "Marshal, what's wrong with you?" I'm fine." Wu clenched his teeth and held on, but in an instant, he opened his mouth and let out a mournful scream. Tang Zheng saw those tentacles crazily drilling into Marshal's heart, and Tang Zheng's heart felt as if it had been ruthlessly stabbed by a knife. He already understood the power of this goo worm, and although his true qi was powerful, it would definitely have a harmful effect on the goo worm. It was precisely because the goo worm had sensed danger that it would counterattack without any regard for its life. If Tang Zheng continued, perhaps the goo worm would die, but Wu's heart would also be devoured by the goo worm. In that case, everything would lose its meaning. Tang Zheng unwillingly withdrew his innate qi. As expected, those tentacles stopped moving and did not continue to drill into Wu's heart. However, they were still greedily sucking the blood from the heart. At this moment, those tentacles had already wrapped around half of the heart, and the speed at which they absorbed the blood became even faster. Wu stopped screaming and gasped for breath. His face turned from red to pale as he asked weakly, "How is it?" Tang Zheng's face was gloomy as he resolutely said, "I will definitely think of a way to cure your poison." Wu was dejected. Since he said so, then the situation was especially serious. She looked deeply at Tang Zheng, squeezed out a smile and said, "It doesn't matter. Life and death are fated. I'm not afraid." Chapter 685. Li Xiaotian looked at the two of them clasped hands and Tang Zheng's resolute eyes. In a trance, she actually had an impulse to change to Marshal. However, the wolf quickly gained the upper hand. She said seriously, "If you don't leave this place, you won't be able to cure her wholeheartedly. Therefore, leaving this place is the most important thing." Tang Zheng glanced at her from the corner of his eyes, supported Marshal, and walked forward. Li Xiaotian knew that his image in Tang Zheng's eyes had once again fallen, so he followed without saying a word. As far as the eye could see, there were many green bamboos that pierced the sky. The three of them had already walked for a period of time, but the bamboo forest seemed to have no end. Li Xiaotian said worriedly, "The last time I encountered this situation, it was also very strange. Moreover, these bamboos are very strange. Even my arrows can't break them." Tang Zheng was shocked and asked, "Really?" Li Xiaotian nodded his head heavily. Tang Zheng reached out and stroked the green bamboo. It was no different from ordinary bamboo, but why was it so stubborn? Even Li Xiaotian's arrow could not harm it in the slightest. "How is it?" Li Xiaotian asked. Tang Zheng did not say a word. His figure flashed and he began to wander around the bamboo forest. His fingers would occasionally tap on the green bamboo. Li Xiaofan, Tian and Marshal looked at him nervously, not knowing what the result would be. Suddenly, Tang Zheng stopped in his tracks. His brows were tightly knitted as he said, "This is an array formation. Is there a way to get out?" Li Xiaotian asked anxiously. "Haha, you want to go out? Once you enter the sword forest, you will be a puppet in my hands, at my mercy. You still want to go out? You must be dreaming." An arrogant laughter suddenly came from the sky. If it was not the imperial advisor, who else could it be? The three of them were shocked. Tang Zheng immediately stood in front of Marshal to protect him. Li Xiaotian glanced at him and could not help but turn pale. The three of them looked up at the sky at the same time. Other than the bamboo forest, there was not a single ghost in sight. "You don't have to look for me. If I don't show myself, you won't be able to find me." The state preceptor obviously knew their actions like the back of his hand. He said proudly, "How was the taste of the poison?" "Tang Zheng, this is all your fault. You killed her, haha." "Nonsense," Marshal retorted loudly. All of this is your scheme. Heh, you still have the strength to refute me. You do have some perseverance. But soon you will run out of strength. You can only lie on the ground and beg for mercy. In the end, you will bleed from your 7 orifices and die. That feeling, I am afraid I will not forget even if I become a ghost. Marshall's expression changed slightly as she faintly felt the pain in her heart increase. The goo worm was causing more and more damage to her. Shut up! Seeing Marshall's reaction, Tang Zheng flew into a rage and roared. The war soul in his hand fiercely slashed forward. Whoosh! The sword light swept across the green bamboo in front of him, causing it to immediately bend down and lie on the ground. However, it quickly bounced back and stood proudly. Seeing this scene with their own eyes, whether it was Tang Zheng or Marshall, they were all in disbelief. How could these green bamboos be so strange? That sword strike just now was enough to split open stones, so why was it unable to harm these seemingly weak bamboos? Haha, feel free to vent your anger. Let's see if you can hurt my sword forest. The state preceptor laughed sinisterly. I don't believe in this evil. Tang Zhang went crazy, the war soul in his hand danced like a tiger, the sword light covered the sky and covered the earth, like an inescapable net, everywhere, slashing onto the green bamboo. In that instant, the bamboo leaves fluttered and the green bamboo bent. This small world was filled with berserk air currents, but when Tang Zheng stopped, the green bamboo all bounced back, not a single one breaking. Hoo-hoo! Tang Zheng gasped for breath as he looked around in disbelief. This was completely beyond his imagination. What kind of ghost sword forest is this? Tang Zheng roared hysterically. The state preceptor's complacent laughter came from the sky, as if he was mocking Tang Zheng. Marshall's face became paler and paler, her eyes revealing a pained expression. Seeing Tang Zheng like this, her heart really ached. Li Xiaotian said calmly, the sword forest is an important place in the state preceptor's residence for people to comprehend sword techniques. Ordinary disciples do not have the qualifications to enter. Only those who have cultivated to a certain level have the qualifications. Yesterday, Junko came out of the sword forest, and then her strength increased greatly. I suspect that she comprehended a new sword technique in the sword forest. Comprehending sword techniques. Tang Zheng was startled, he looked around. What did these green bamboos have to do with sword techniques? I don't cultivate sword techniques, so I'm not very clear about the way of the sword, so I can't tell if this news is true or false. Li Xiaotian said regretfully. Tang Zheng, on the other hand, calmed down. Didn't he train in sword techniques? Moreover, the heaven-flying immortal sword technique was a very powerful set of sword techniques. Since Junko could comprehend sword techniques in the sword forest, why couldn't he? He calmed down the anger in his heart, and his heart calmed down bit by bit. He simply closed his eyes, circulated his innate qi, and released his senses. Suddenly, he felt a trace of strangeness. The green bamboos disappeared and were replaced by streaks of sword qi. The sword qi pierced the sky and stood proudly. An indescribable mysterious aura lingered in the sword forest. He seemed to have realized that the green bamboos were all illusions. Their true colors were streaks of sword qi. No wonder weapons were unable to harm them in the slightest, because they did not have a physical body. The green bamboos were just illusions. Who exactly thought of this method to actually condense so much sword qi? Comprehending sword techniques in this kind of environment is indeed twice the result with half the effort. Every blade of grass and tree here was compatible with the way of the sword. As long as one used their heart to sense it, coupled with a certain amount of talent and cultivation as a foundation, it would not be difficult to comprehend sword techniques. When he quietly sensed the sword qi, the innate qi in his body involuntarily sped up. The heaven-flying immortal sword technique also began to circulate on its own. He subconsciously raised the war soul sword. Swish! Sword light flashed, and the war soul sword drew a beautiful sword light in the air. Wind rising, clouds surging. Although Tang Zheng still had his eyes closed, he still recognized this sword move. The innate qi quickly circulated according to the path of the heaven-flying immortal sword technique. This sword move was naturally used, completely out of his control. It was as if something had triggered the heaven-flying immortal sword technique. His heart suddenly became clear. It must be because of this sword forest. Other people could comprehend sword techniques here, but the heaven-flying immortal sword technique was too high level. He did not need to spend too much effort to comprehend it. The sword forest naturally triggered this point. Immediately, he swept away the dejection and bad luck from before and became spirited. He quietly felt the changes in his body. The heaven-flying immortals had a total of 6 moves, and each move had 36 moves. It was incomparably complicated and varied. Previously, he had only cultivated to the 5th move, Return to Origin. He had not even touched the threshold of the 6th move. The 6th move was the peak of this sword technique. Of course, it was not easy to cultivate. The innate chi was still circulating rapidly in his meridians, and the war soul sword in his hands still did not stop. Sword breaking 10,000 caddies. The 2nd move of the heaven-flying immortals. Next. 3rd move. Lightning fire sword. 4th move. Heaven falls and earth rends. 5th move. Return to origin. The innate chi still did not stop. Tang Zheng felt like he was a balloon. The innate chi had already filled his entire body, and was about to explode. The war soul sword was completed in one go, and these 5 moves were unleashed in an instant. Puff puff puff. The green bamboo was slashed by the sword again and again, and then it quickly returned to its original appearance. Tang Zheng seemed to be still doing useless work. Although this iron bow could not compare to the heaven-shocking bow, it was still a rare weapon. You ate the heart-devouring pill and you're still so brave. Humph. This is truly unexpected. However, without my antidote, you won't be able to hold on for long. I won't kill you, I'll torture you to death. The Imperial advisor stared at Wu and laughed sinisterly. Whoosh whoosh. The Inferno Nether Divine Palm was like a tiger as it attacked the Imperial Preceptor. However, the Imperial Preceptor did not meet force with force. Instead, he dodged to the side and sneered. You are digging your own grave. The more you circulate, the faster the poison will take effect. I don't need to do anything. You won't be able to last long. Chapter 686. Marshall fell to the ground, her entire body twitching in pain. Her face was devoid of blood, her pupils dilated, gradually losing their color. Her consciousness was gradually blurring, the scene in front of her quickly spinning. She felt as if her heart was about to stop beating. No, her heart was about to disappear. A heart-wrenching pain. She finally knew what it was like. The Imperial Tutor smiled in satisfaction and said, Now you know how powerful it is. He walked past her in large strides and headed straight for Tang Zheng. Li Xiaotian clenched her teeth and secretly said, Go all out. Her figure flashed and blocked in front of the Imperial Tutor. However, she was not in a hurry to make a move because she knew that she was not the Imperial Tutor's opponent. If she made a move, it would mean that she would lose. Her goal was to delay the Imperial Tutor and buy time for Tang Zheng. The Imperial Tutor looked at Li Xiaotian with a murderous look and said, You did not hesitate to sacrifice your life for him, is it really worth it? You are the Holy Maiden of Li Palace. Li Xiaotian lightly said, Whether it is worth it or not, I am the clearest about it. Heh, since you are so muddle-headed, then there is no need for me to persuade you. Li Palace's palace master knows that I killed you, so he can't do anything to me. Moreover, with Tang Zheng's technique, a merely palace can be turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. The Imperial Tutor arrogantly said, Don't boast too early. Be careful not to sprain your tongue. The Imperial Tutor smiled and did not comment. He raised his leg and walked towards Li Xiaotian. Wait a minute. Li Xiaotian immediately reached out her hand to stop him. The Imperial Tutor subconsciously stopped and said, What, you still have your last words? Li Xiaotian rolled her eyes and said, Yes. Too late. The Imperial Tutor did not give her the chance and directly chopped at her with the broken sword. Puff. Li Xiaotian's clothes were cut open and blood splattered out. She was injured. With just one sword, without the shooting sun arrow, she could not block one of the Imperial Tutor's attacks. The Imperial Preceptor arrogantly chased after him and said, You are too weak. There is no challenge or sense of accomplishment in killing you. Li Xiaotian's eyes flashed with despair. This was the result of trying to be brave. If he didn't pretend to be a good person, he wouldn't have fallen to such a state. From the corner of her eyes, she glanced at Tang Zheng and discovered that his eyes were still tightly shut. The war soul sword in his hand was like a tiger giving birth to wind, as fast as lightning, causing the wind in the sword forest to become even stronger. Tang Zheng, I hope I've bought enough time for you, she thought in despair. She unwillingly raised her head to block, but the Imperial Preceptor's broken sword was like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. She could not block it at all. As long as the broken sword fell again, her life would come to an end. Whoosh! A strand of hair on her forehead was sliced into two by the sword chi. She could even feel a burning pain on her cheeks. Creak, creak. Suddenly, a cry sounded in her ears. Then, a ball of fire brushed past her body and soared into the air, spraying towards the Imperial Preceptor. The heat wave hit him in the face. The Imperial Preceptor had no choice but to take half a step back. Li Xiaotian also hurriedly retreated, escaping from the gates of hell. Turning her head, she found that Xiao Bai was standing by her feet. He raised his little head and pouted his little mouth as he spat out fire. Li Xiaotian was overjoyed. She couldn't wait to hug Xiao Bai and kiss him. She had seen Xiao Bai's power, so she hurriedly urged, "Xiao Bai, burn him to death." The Imperial Preceptor was burned by the fire, and appeared to be in a sorry state. He angrily roared, "Little bastard, you escaped a calamity before. This time, without Tang Zheng, I want to see what kind of waves you can stir up." Xiao Bai screamed again and did not retreat an inch. "Die!" The Imperial Preceptor shouted as the broken sword in his hand slashed down. Boom! Flames soared into the air and completely enveloped the broken sword. However, the broken sword immediately burst out a bright sword light, suppressing the flames and pressing forward. The flames retreated bit by bit. Xiao Bai's claws dug deep into the soil, resisting the impact of the broken sword with difficulty. Gradually, the look in his eyes became dim. Previously, in the battle with the water sword, he had consumed a lot of energy and had not recovered yet. But in order to protect Tang Zheng, he resolutely stood out. But now, he was exhausted and had reached the end. He turned his head and glanced at Tang Zheng as if to say his final farewell. Then, he clenched his teeth and let out a sharp cry. The flames suddenly exploded. The broken sword swung back. The Imperial Preceptor's arm suddenly shook and the broken sword almost flew out of his hand. He was shocked. This little guy's strength really made him look at him with new eyes. But after all, he was an expert who had experienced hundreds of battles. He understood that at this critical moment, he could not drop the ball. Thus, he endured the rebounding force from the broken sword and swung it down again. Whoosh! The air was quickly split into two halves. The sword chi fell on Xiao Bai's head. In the next second, it seemed to be split into two. Li Xiaotian saw this, but there was nothing he could do. He unwillingly shouted no, but it was useless. Clang! With a muffled sound, the broken sword bounced up and flew out of the Imperial Preceptor's hand. The Imperial Preceptor was stunned and exclaimed, "How could this be?" Looking carefully, he saw a huge turtle shell in front of Xiao Bai, completely covering Xiao Bai. There was a white mark on the turtle shell. Apparently, it was left by the broken sword. Although there was a white mark, the turtle shell was still intact. A small head drilled out of the turtle shell and kept blinking at Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai's big eyes were also filled with joy. He stretched out his small paw and touched Gui Qiansui's head. Although Gui Qiansui's attack power was not strong, because of its nature, its defensive ability was particularly strong. This had been proved just now. It had been hiding in Tang Zheng's backpack. Because its fighting power was not strong, it had not participated in the battle. At this moment, Tang Zheng was in danger. Gui Qiansui finally fought back. "What is this?" The Imperial Preceptor looked at the trembling broken sword in the mud, and then looked at Gui Qiansui and exclaimed, "I, Gui Qiansui, will absolutely not allow you to hurt the exalted immortal." Gui Qiansui spoke in human language and said firmly, "You are a demon beast, but you actually cultivated to the level where you can speak human language." The State Preceptor was startled as if he saw a ghost. Exalted Immortal. Who is the Exalted Immortal? His eyes turned and stared at Tang Zheng. He said incredulously, "You actually called him an immortal. What qualifications does he have?" Immortal's magical power is not something you can guess. Gui Qiansui said disdainfully. The Imperial Preceptor restrained his expression and said, I don't care what immortal he is. Even if he is a real immortal, I will not let him return to my sword forest. His figure flashed and he picked up his broken sword. Like a gust of wind, he swept over Gue Chensui's head. Gue Chensui could only sigh. It was too late to stop him. Whoosh! Tang Zheng was surrounded by a gust of wind. His eyes were still closed. In his mind, the situation of the sword forest was completely presented. He saw Wu and Li Xiaotian risking their lives to protect him. He saw Wu fall to the ground. He saw Xiao Bai and Gue Chensui's decisive action. But he could not help them. Because he had reached the most critical moment. That trace of understanding was getting clearer and clearer. He felt that he was inextricably linked with the sword qi in the sword forest. The wind between heaven and earth was like a link between him and the sword qi, transmitting each other's information. The battle soul in his hand gradually slowed down. But he still repeated the 5 moves of flying immortals from outer sky over and over again. It was a hair-raising process. Master, the sword qi has a spirit. If you can communicate with it, the sword qi can be collected in your hand. A voice suddenly sounded in Tang Zheng's mind. He immediately remembered that it was the voice of the sword spirit. At that time, he obtained the sword spirit and the wisp of remnant soul in the snow mountain in the northeast. Moreover, with the original battle soul in the battle soul, the 3 combined and fused into a new sword spirit. However, the sword spirit had always been silent, and other than discovering that it had allowed the war soul sword to level up to a heaven-level magic treasure, it did not display any other mystical abilities, so he temporarily threw it to the back of his mind. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the sword spirit took the initiative to speak. You're saying that the sword qi has a spirit. As long as I can communicate with it, I can collect all the sword qi for my own use? Tang Zheng asked in surprise. With so many sword qi, if he could collect them all, then Tang Zheng's cultivation would definitely advance by leaps and bounds. It was completely a blessing in disguise. Yes, the sword spirit replied. I can help master. How can you help me? The sword spirit has a spirit. The sword qi also has a spirit. The 2 are connected and can be fused into one. The sword spirit said solemnly. Then hurry up and act. Tang Zheng had already seen the imperial tutor pass Gue Chensui and Xiao Bai and fly above his head. He was condescending and slashed down with his sword. He was bound to heavily injure him. He had no time to resist. He could only place his hopes on the sword spirit. The sword spirit received the order. The battle soul's sword light shone brightly like a bright sun. A buzzing sword sound rang out as if it was speaking. Then, a strange scene appeared. Buzzing sounds immediately rose and fell from all directions. It was like an echo in response to the battle soul's sword cry. These sounds seemed to be communicating with each other. It was ringing non-stop. The imperial tutor who was in mid-air had a huge change in expression. Although he did not understand what the buzzing sound meant, he had already sensed that the aura in the sword forest had undergone an earth-shattering change. It was a change that made him afraid. A strong wind blew and the green bamboo swayed non-stop. The sound of shattering rose and fell one after another. The imperial tutor had no choice but to stop his attack. He landed on the ground and looked around. Looking at the chaotic sword forest, he shouted, "What's going on?" There was a mysterious connection between him and the sword forest. This was a special connection that all the imperial tutors of the past would cultivate. Therefore, the imperial tutor could control everything in the sword forest as he wished. But at this moment, he realized that this connection was rapidly weakening. This was unprecedented and unheard of. All the imperial tutors had never encountered such a thing. Gradually, his eyes revealed fear for the first time. It was a fear that came from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 687. The crackling sound became louder and louder, continuous. As far as the eye could see, the swaying bamboo exploded one after another with a loud bang, turning into pieces that drifted away with the wind. The imperial preceptor's impression of this scene was too deep. Every time he successfully comprehended a sword technique, there would be a corresponding bamboo that would explode. If he was lucky enough, there would be a treasure sword hidden in the bamboo. From then on, the treasure sword would belong to the person who comprehended the sword technique. Every time the sword technique was comprehended to a higher level, there would be more bamboo that would explode. That year, after the imperial preceptor had succeeded in comprehending the sword technique, 18 bamboo had exploded at the same time. It was a spectacular sight. After Junko had comprehended the sword technique, only one bamboo had exploded. This meant that her sword technique was still worlds apart from the Imperial Preceptor's. At this moment, the Imperial Preceptor looked at the exploding bamboo, which had already exceeded 18. Could it be that Tang Zheng's sword technique was so powerful that it was even more than the number of bamboo that he had exploded back then? Then what kind of sword technique would this be? Immediately, he was anxious and angry in his heart. Without any grace, he roared. Stop, quickly stop. How could Tang Zheng care about him? His emotions fluctuated as he could clearly feel that the exploded bamboo had turned into strands of sword qi. The sword qi crazily poured into the War Soul sword and then transmitted into his 8 extraordinary meridians. In an instant, he was like a huge pool that was flooded with a large amount of water. These sword qi quickly transformed into true qi and stored in his body. The true qi rapidly soared. At the same time, most of the sword qi was absorbed by the War Soul sword. The light on the War Soul sword became more and more intense, and the dark appearance of the War Soul sword began to change bit by bit. The veins on the Imperial Preceptor's forehead bulged as he roared, Tang Zheng, I will kill you. His hands quickly formed a seal, and a hand seal rose into the air and circled above his head. Previously, when he used the sword technique, he did not need to form a seal at all. This was because his cultivation had already reached a certain level, and ordinary sword techniques could be used with just a thought. But this time, he actually formed a seal, which meant that this move was definitely not simple. The handprint quickly circled above his head. He gripped the broken sword with both hands and slashed forward while roaring, 1,000 killing slash. The broken sword flew out of his hand, and the handprint above his head also flew out like a meteor and merged with the broken sword. In an instant, the broken sword underwent an earth-shattering change. The broken part of the sword actually grew out again, forming a complete sword. Li Xiaotian was dumbstruck by the rebirth of the broken sword. However, Tang Zheng remained unmoved like a boulder as he shouted, Explode! Pa! Pa! All the bamboos in the forest exploded, turning into strands of sword energy. Beams of light also rose from some of the bamboos. Clearly, there were swords hidden in these bamboos. It was as if Junko had obtained them. These swords shone brightly, but they were like meteors that streaked across the sky, exploding with a loud bang, turning into specks of light. Along with the overflowing sword qi, they all rushed into the War Soul sword. A portion of them was absorbed by Tang Zheng's body and transformed into true qi. The Imperial Advisor's 1,000 killing slash had already arrived in front of Tang Zheng. The powerful sword qi cut open wounds on his body, and in the next moment, it seemed like it was going to reap his life. Break! Just at this moment, Tang Zheng's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened, as if they were glowing. He opened his mouth and roared, Heaven-Flying Immortal! Tang Zheng had finally mastered the 6th move of the Heaven-Flying Immortal sword technique. Swish! The War Soul sword flew out from his hand and turned into a bolt of lightning, striking the broken sword. Crack! With a crisp sound, the newly grown part of the broken sword broke with a loud bang. Puff! The Imperial Advisor spat out a mouthful of blood and knelt on the ground with one knee, looking at the scene in front of him in shock. How could this be? The 1,000 killing slash is still not his match. How is this possible? He muttered to himself, as if he had been possessed. But in the next second, his pupils widened even more, because the War Soul sword did not stop. Instead, it flew towards him like a hot knife through butter. He flipped backwards in the air and dodged the attack. The War Soul sword brushed past his scalp as it flew past. Before he could even catch his breath, the War Soul sword changed its direction in mid-air and stabbed towards his back. At such a long distance, Tang Zheng was actually able to change his direction through the air. He suddenly realized something and exclaimed, Imperial Sword Technique, you actually learned the Imperial Sword Technique. This was the technique that the Imperial Advisor yearned for even in his dreams, but the ninjutsu did not include the Imperial Sword Technique. He had only heard of it from his seniors, and once he cultivated the Imperial Sword Technique, he would be like a god, taking a person's head from 1,000 miles away. He never thought that Tang Zheng would actually know such a technique at such a young age. Tang Zheng had long since cultivated the Imperial Sword Technique, but the Imperial Sword Technique consumed a lot of the caster's innate qi, unless he really found a flying sword. Flying swords were different from ordinary magic treasures. Only with special materials could they be forged into flying swords. Although the War Soul Sword was already a heaven-level magic treasure, it was still not a flying sword, which was why Tang Zheng did not often use the Imperial Sword technique. But now that he had finally comprehended the sixth move of the Flying Immortals from Heaven, everything had changed. Flying Immortals from Heaven, as the name suggested, were like immortals flying from the heavens. This immortal was the sword, and the sword in his hand turned into an immortal. It was like an arm, and wherever he pointed, it would be there. It was perfectly compatible with the essence of the Imperial Sword technique, merging the two into one. Tang Zheng was able to control the sword so smoothly through the air. The Imperial advisor was extremely regretful. He did not investigate clearly, causing his efforts to be in vain and his losses to be huge. Seeing the War Soul Sword carrying a berserk aura attack him once again, the Imperial advisor was unarmed and did not fight back. With a thought, he disappeared without a trace. Boom! The War Soul Sword slashed onto the ground, causing mud to fly up. Escape technique. Tang Zheng was awe-inspiring. The Imperial advisor had an escape technique, so even if he had comprehended the sixth move of the Flying Immortals from Heaven, it would still be useless. He definitely won't be willing to escape like this. He must be hiding somewhere, waiting for an opportunity. With regards to the Imperial advisor's sinister methods, Tang Zheng still remembered them clearly. He immediately came in front of Wu Mian, afraid that the Imperial advisor would take her hostage again. Marshall was in a daze, his entire body twitching, his eyes rolled back, as if he could lose his life at any moment. What should we do? He was already certain that his innate chi would only stimulate the goo, allowing it to take Marshall's life even faster, so he did not dare to act rashly. Marshall, I will always be by your side. You must persevere. I will definitely find a way to save you. Tang Zheng whispered into Marshall's ear, not knowing if she could hear him. Li Xiaotian did not have the mood to care about Marshall's life and death. She was looking around in surprise and shouted, "The sword forest has disappeared." The sword forest had indeed disappeared. The originally lush green bamboo had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a vast and empty wasteland. The village not far away also entered her eyes, but the dense white fog in the distance caused her heart to instantly fall to the bottom. Although they had escaped the shackles of the sword forest, they were still trapped in the Imperial advisor's mansion. The thick fog outside was still an insurmountable barrier. Let's leave this place quickly, Li Xiaotian urged. Tang Zheng swept his eyebrows, causing Li Xiaotian's heart to tighten. He had the urge to retreat, and exclaimed, "Your cultivation!" Tang Zheng coldly snorted, but did not reply. Just now, when the sword chi entered his body, it caused his innate chi to soar, breaking through to the 9th level of Anidia in one fell swoop. From the 7th level of Anidia to the 9th level of Anidia, 2 levels of cultivation had broken through like a hot knife through butter. This was only a portion of the sword chi. The majority of the sword chi had been absorbed by the War Soul Sword's sword spirit. One could imagine how powerful the sword chi contained within the sword forest was. It was simply a treasure trove. No wonder the Imperial advisor's mansion regarded it as an important place. It was a pity that the Imperial advisor did not know how powerful the heaven-flying immortal sword technique that Tang Zheng cultivated was, nor did he know that the War Soul Sword contained a sword spirit. Therefore, Tang Zheng was able to take advantage of such a great opportunity and absorb all the sword chi in the sword forest. Without the nourishment of the sword chi, the treasured swords that were originally buried in the soil also disappeared, turning into strands of sword chi that merged into the War Soul Sword. At this moment, the War Soul Sword had already undergone quite a few changes. The originally dark sword body had mottled bright spots, like a dusty pearl that had finally revealed the tip of an iceberg. Li Xiaotian recalled the frightening situation just now, especially the last few sword strikes of Tang Zheng, forcing the Imperial advisor to flee in a sorry state. She couldn't help but feel intoxicated. At the same time, she also felt a deep sense of powerlessness. The gap between her and Tang Zheng was growing larger and larger. It was as if there was a chasm that was difficult to cross. She could not guess what level Tang Zheng's cultivation had reached. Seeing how meticulous he was with Wu, she could not help but think that it would be great if he was in Wu's position. Tang Zheng carried Wu Tsong by the waist and said solemnly, "Let's go." Together, they walked out of the sword forest. The messy sword forest was especially eye-catching in this quiet village. When they walked out of the sword forest, a black mass of people surrounded them from all directions. Where did these people come from? Li Xiaotian sighed and explained, "There are a lot of people in the Imperial Advisor's mansion, so they must have received the orders of the Imperial Advisor to hide and not come out. Now that you have destroyed their sword forest, of course they will rush out and fight you to the death." Fight to the death? Humph, I think it's more like courting death. Tang Zheng was not afraid at all. His cultivation had increased by 2 levels. In addition, after comprehending the heaven-flying immortal sword technique, his confidence had increased greatly. The War Soul sword in his hand let out a buzzing sword cry, trembling non-stop, as if it had the urge to drink blood. Li Xiaotian was not optimistic and said, "Ants swallow an elephant. The strength of an individual is limited, although their strength is not as good as yours, but they can't withstand the number of people. The human wave tactic will also drag you to death." Tang Zheng could not help but remember the situation in the Imperial Palace, and said disdainfully, "Island nation all like human wave tactics? Since that's the case, then let's fight. You hold her. If she suffers any more injuries, I will hold you accountable." As he spoke, he handed Wu Wu over to Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian looked at Wu, who was in his embrace at a loss, thinking, "Why is this my responsibility again?" Chapter 688. Walala. War Spirit's blade left a long trail on the ground as sparks flew everywhere. Tang Zheng took large strides and rushed out of the crowd to kill. At the front of the crowd, a familiar figure jumped into his eyes. Junko. She had actually appeared again. Moreover, she was obviously the core of this group of people. Her expression was ashen, and she was like a female leopard that had gone berserk. She roared sternly, "These people destroyed our sword forest. Kill. Use their blood as a sacrifice to the sword forest. Kill." Deafening battle cries rang out from the crowd. Tang Zheng's eyebrows rose high as War Spirit's blade glowed with light. Especially those mottled spots, they were like bright stars in the sky, shining brightly and emitting sword chi that made people's heart palpitate. But the Imperial Tutor's people's eyes were red as they charged forward without caring about anything else. Puff puff puff. War Spirit's blade was raised high, bringing with it a stream of scarlet blood. Some people screamed as they fell to the ground. Like an infectious disease, more and more people fell to the ground. Wherever Tang Zheng passed, no one could stand. At this moment, he was at his peak state. Fasting grade 9, complete heaven sword and flying immortal sword technique, it was simply a match made in heaven. When they worked together, the explosive killing power made people's jaws drop. Junko was pushed to the back of the crowd. The hatred in her eyes was gradually replaced by shock. How did he become so powerful? Junko could not find the answer. She could only see her sect members fall one by one. Suddenly, as if she had gone crazy, she screamed hysterically, "Retreat! Retreat!" The crowd retreated like a tide. How could Tang Zheng let go of this opportunity to chase after them? War Spirit's blade flashed as he charged towards these people. "Seal!" Junko shouted in Island Nation's language. Immediately, everyone gave up resisting and formed seals with both hands. In an instant, a mysterious aura filled the air. Tang Zheng's expression turned cold as he looked up at the sky. He saw that the enemies were all raising their hands in the air. Then, a little light gathered above their heads. Finally, a sword was formed. They actually used ninjutsu and hand seals to condense a sword. The light of this sword was not bright, but there was no doubt that the lethality it contained was not to be underestimated. "Kill!" Everyone shouted in unison. The ground shook, and the surrounding houses collapsed. The stream splashed several meters high, and even the soil on the ground floated up. Tang Zheng stopped in his tracks, pointed his right hand forward, and shouted, "Heaven flying immortal!" Shwa! The War Soul sword flew into the air and turned into a sword light. At the same time, the virtual sword above everyone's head also shot out, welcoming the War Soul sword. Boom! A blinding ray of light rose from the point where the two swords collided, spreading in all directions. A powerful impact followed closely behind, raising the ground in all directions. Tang Zheng felt as if he had been hit by a huge force. He felt a sweetness in his throat and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He forcibly suppressed the urge to spit out blood and looked up. It was a vast expanse of white. There was no other color in the world. On the other side, the sound of people falling to the ground also rose and fell. Obviously, not only did Tang Jing not feel good, the people on the other side were probably even worse. After all, their cultivation was not comparable to Tang Zheng's, so their endurance was naturally much weaker. His eyes were no longer of any use. Tang Zhang could only release his perception, trying to figure out what was going on with the other party. Just as he circulated his true qi, a sense of danger surged in his heart. What's going on? He didn't have time to think. He rolled on the ground and leaped to the side. Boom! He could vaguely see that the place where he was standing had turned into a deep pit, and the Imperial advisor was standing beside the pit. His eyes were blood red, like a wild beast that wanted to devour a person. The Imperial advisor really didn't escape. Tang Zheng shivered, and with a wave of his hand, an even more resplendent sword light lit up in the white light, and the War Soul sword flew back into his hand from who knows where. Looking at it carefully, the mottled spots on the War Soul sword were even bigger, covering almost half of the sword body. The original black spots were like spots of rust that could peel off at any time. The exposed spots were abnormally dazzling, shining brightly. Tang Zheng, you have a divine armament in your hand and a powerful sword technique. I was careless and actually fell into your trap. This is a great humiliation. I will kill you and wash away my previous shame. The Imperial advisor said with a murderous aura. Obediently release Wu Junshan and the others, and I will naturally leave. Otherwise, I'm afraid your disciples will be buried with you. Tang Zhang said in a clear voice. Humph, you want to save them, right? Fine, follow me. I'll see if you have the ability. The Imperial advisor rolled his eyes and laughed strangely. Tang Zheng's head jumped. The other party's smile was too strange. Could it be that he had some tricks up his sleeve? But even if there really was a trick, he could only rush in. Because Tang Zheng knew that although he had narrowly won the match, it was impossible for him to truly kill the Imperial advisor. After all, the other party's cultivation was much higher than his. However, it was impossible for the Imperial advisor to capture him alive. The two of them fell into a stalemate. The surrounding white light had already gradually dissipated, and their eyes finally regained their vision. With a single glance, everyone was dumbstruck. The paradise-like village had already disappeared, and in its place was ruins. It was a complete mess. On the ground, there were many disciples of the Imperial advisor's manor, and those who could stand could be counted on one hand. Just now, they had fought against Tang Zhang with the strength of a group, but they did not gain the slightest advantage. Everyone looked at Tang Zheng in shock. They had never thought that such a young person would be able to cultivate to such a godly level. Li Xiaotian was hugging Wu at the side, in a daze. His eyes were lifeless, his brain had already shut down, and he had lost the ability to think. 1 against 100, the courage of 1,000 soldiers, nothing more than this. Everyone's eyes were once again focused on Tang Zheng and the Imperial advisor. Hearing the conversation between the two, Li Xiaotian's heart could not help but tighten. He wanted to say something to dissuade them, but he swallowed his words back. At this moment, her words to Tang Zhang was simply a passing wind, and Tang Zhang would not pay attention to it. Imperial advisor. Island nation people saw the Imperial advisor and respectfully saluted. Even those who were lying on the ground struggled to get up. The Imperial advisor looked at them indifferently and said, "Stand down." Everyone hesitated for a moment, but they did not dare to disobey his order. They supported the injured disciples and retreated to the side. Junko's face was full of shame. She lowered her head and retreated to the side. The Imperial advisor looked at this group of defeated soldiers without a trace of pity. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Just now, he let these people rush forward. He knew that there would be many casualties, but the final result was still beyond his expectations. He originally hoped that with so many people working together, they could at least seriously injure Tang Zhang. But he did not expect that he would not even spit out a mouthful of blood. One must know that when he was hiding in the dark, he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. This move, Heaven Flying Immortal, was deeply imprinted in the depths of his soul. Even if he died, he would not forget it. Especially when he saw this move for the second time. His soul had a kind of feeling of trembling. This sword was too powerful, the brilliant heavenly might was nothing more than this. Immediately, this made him even more determined to capture Tang Zheng alive. Only by pulling out all the things in his head could he make up for his loss. Otherwise, even if he killed Tang Zheng, his loss would not be recovered. The imperial advisor tidied up his bad mood, glanced at Tang Zheng, and rushed out like a whirlwind, and said, "If you want to save people, then follow me." His voice fell. He had already rushed out more than 100 meters, running straight into the depths of the village. Tang Zheng took Marshal from Li Xiaotian's hand, and chased after him without saying a word. Li Xiaotian hesitated for a moment, and followed closely behind. Immediately the imperial advisor was in front, Tang Zheng and Li Xiaotian were behind. Xiaobai stood on his shoulder, and Gue Qiansui went back into his backpack. One in front, one behind as fast as lightning. As Tang Zheng locked onto the imperial tutor's figure, he lowered his head to look at Marshal, who was in his embrace. Her face was already devoid of blood, and she had completely fallen into a coma, but the occasional throbbing between her brows still showed the pain he was enduring. He carefully controlled his true qi to enter Marshal's body, and soon, the scene around her heart clearly appeared in his mind. The black goo worm had completely awakened, and broke out of its shell. Like a squid, it had countless tentacles, firmly wrapped around Marshal's heart. The goo worm was no longer black, but had turned blood red, as if it had sucked the heart's blood. The heart's heartbeat had become very weak, as if it could stop at any time. As if sensing the threat of his true qi, the goo worm's tentacles suddenly contracted, tightly wrapping around the heart. Marshal immediately let out a cry of pain, and actually woke up, but the intense pain in her eyes made Tang Zheng feel as if a knife was being twisted. Where are we going?" Marshal asked weakly. "We are saving people." Marshal's eyes immediately showed a trace of joy and said, "You found them?" "Not yet, but I will definitely find them, I promise you," Tang Zheng said resolutely. Marshal's mouth twitched, and she squeezed out a smile. "I believe you, you must save them." Before she finished speaking, her head tilted, and she fainted again. "Marshal, Marshal!" Tang Zheng shouted loudly, but there was no response. Li Xiaotian looked at him from the side, and wanted to say something, but hesitated, and finally clenched his teeth and said, "Her poison is already very serious." The meaning behind his words seemed to be that he wanted Tang Zheng to give up. Tang Zheng suddenly raised her head and glared fiercely at Li Xiaotian. Her neck suddenly shrunk, as she felt the fear of a sword cutting across her neck. "Until the last moment, I will never give up. This is what I promised her," Tang Zheng said word by word. The corner of Li Xiaotian's mouth twitched, and he said hesitantly, "She's so lucky to have met you." While they were talking, the group had already left the village far behind them, crossed a mountain, and finally arrived in front of a huge lake. Chapter 689. The imperial advisor stopped in front of the lake and looked at the beautiful and quiet lake. A mysterious smile appeared on his face, and a deep sense of reverence appeared between his brows. "Imperial advisor, there is no path ahead. Where else do you want to lead us?" Tang Zheng asked in a deep voice. The imperial advisor turned his head to look at him and said, "Who said there's no path?" He stepped on the waves and walked towards the center of the lake. With his cultivation, he could already cross the river on a reed. With a light tap of his foot on the surface of the lake, ripples appeared on the surface of the lake as he quickly walked towards the center of the lake. "What is he going to do?" Li Xiaotian asked. Tang Zheng shook his head. He could not guess what the other party was thinking. "Take good care of Marshal." Tang Zheng handed Marshal over to Li Xiaotian. "Even if there really is some scheme, I have no way out." Li Xiaotian hugged Marshal and looked straight at him. She wanted to say something but hesitated. "Take care of yourself." Tang Zheng looked at her deeply, then looked at Marshal gently. With a leap, he jumped onto the surface of the lake. The soles of his shoes sank into the lake, but he did not completely fall into the water. However, compared to the imperial advisor's leisurely stroll, it was clearly much more difficult for him to walk. Seeing that he had also arrived at the center of the lake, the imperial advisor gave him a strange smile and shouted, "Open!" Crack! As if something had been touched, cracking sounds could be heard from the bottom of the lake. The surface of the lake began to fluctuate violently, and in an instant, a huge whirlpool appeared on the surface of the lake. The imperial advisor stood by the side of the whirlpool. No matter how powerful the whirlpool was, it was unable to shake him in the slightest. Tang Zheng felt the vibration coming from beneath his feet and was surprised. What was the other party trying to do? Before he could understand, the whirlpool grew bigger and bigger, and a black hole appeared in front of him. The lake water flowed down the edge of the black hole like a huge waterfall. The black hole was incomparably dark, without a single ray of light. It was impossible to see what was below, and a formless fear struck his heart. If you want to save him, then follow me. After the state preceptor finished speaking, he jumped into the black hole. Tang Zheng stretched his neck and found that the imperial tutor's figure had been swallowed by the black hole. He turned his head to look at Li Xiaotian and Marshall who were on the shore. Li Xiaotian looked at him with burning eyes, revealing a faint concern between his brows. He suddenly turned his head and touched Xiao Bai on his shoulder saying, "Xiao Bai, let's go and see what's strange down there." Xiao Bai nodded heavily, his small eyes filled with a dignified expression. Whoosh! Tang Zheng jumped into the black hole. He heard the sound of wind and the roaring sound of flowing water. As far as the eye could see, there was only darkness. It was like a bottomless pit. He didn't know when it would end, and he didn't know where it would lead. If an ordinary person had fallen into such a black hole, they would have screamed in fear and lost control of their bowels. But Tang Zheng didn't. He was like a calm and wise man, trying to find out what was waiting for him in front. The darkness had completely submerged him, and the state preceptor's figure had long disappeared. A flame blossomed on Tang Zheng's fingertips. In order to disperse the sticky darkness, he ignited the true fire. The purple true fire was exceptionally bright in the darkness, illuminating the surroundings and restoring his line of sight. The fear in his heart gradually subsided. He looked carefully, and his pupils couldn't help but shrink as he exclaimed, "This is a huge cave!" He could clearly see the edge of the black hole, the flowing water on the bluestone slabs, covered in moss, and extended downwards to an unknown place. This cave is really deep. Tang Zheng felt that he was about to fall to the earth's core. Why would there be such a strange cave in the state preceptor's mansion? Furthermore, it was built in the center of a lake and set up such a strange mechanism. Suddenly, land appeared below. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. He had finally reached the end. He immediately circulated his innate qi, which continuously rotated under his feet, canceling out most of the impact. Pang! He landed steadily on the ground, but the impact still shattered the stone slabs under his feet. Where's the state preceptor? He had already raised his guard and looked around vigilantly, but there was no trace of the state preceptor. Since he led me here, he definitely won't hide and not show himself. This is definitely not a dead end. There is still a path ahead. Sure enough, he found a stone door behind the waterfall. The stone door was hidden in the darkness. If he didn't have the true fire in his hand to illuminate it, it would have been extremely difficult to find. After the water from the waterfall fell to the ground, it splashed and flowed along a huge ditch to an unknown place, not accumulating on the ground. Passing through the water curtain, Tang Zheng entered the stone door. A cool breeze blew out from the stone door. There was air convection. This meant that it was not a dead end, so he carefully walked forward, guarding against any sudden attacks. He could already conclude that at this moment, the state preceptor did everything possible to lure him here. It was definitely not just to kill him, but to capture him and obtain his magic. Then the state preceptor would definitely not easily take his life. The state preceptor also understood that Tang Zheng could end his life at any time, so he had to do it in one strike. A small trick would not work at all. Since that was the case, then he had to guard against the state preceptor's big move. A big move that could make him surrender. Ding dong! A crisp sound startled Tang Zheng. He tripped over something hard. What the hell is this? He quickly used the true fire to illuminate the area. His breathing could not help but tighten, and he subconsciously took a step back. A skull! A terrifying skull was placed on the ground. There were still traces of blood on it, as if it had not completely dried up. This! Tang Zheng felt a chill run from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. Although he was not afraid of this, why would there be a skull here? And it looked relatively fresh, as if it had just died not long ago. Suddenly he realized something. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed, "Could it be theirs?" Wu Junshan and the others were imprisoned. Could this be one of their heads? Once this thought drilled into his mind, it could not be dismissed. He could not help but fall into deep worry. What if it was Lan Yu's? What if it was Wu Junshan's? At this moment, he gradually understood that he did not know when, but he had actually become very concerned about their safety. It was the kind of concern that came from the bottom of his heart, unknowingly and imperceptibly formed. Did he not always have a good impression of the two? How did it become like this? He shook his head hard, but he could not figure it out. In the end, he attributed all of this to the blood relationship, where blood was thicker than water. Although he had always been avoiding this kind of blood relationship, the feelings in the depths of his heart had unknowingly changed. In fact, when he was very young, he looked forward to this kind of relationship very much. Seeing that other children had parents who doted on them while he only had a grandfather, he had also fantasized that his parents would come to his side and give him endless love. In the end, none of this came true, so he buried this extravagant hope in the bottom of his heart. Ever since Lan Yu and Wu Junshan appeared, although he firmly rejected them, unknowingly, the hope buried in the depths of his heart had begun to sprout again, and it had unknowingly grown. At this moment, when he realized that the two of them might really have left him, they were separated by life and death. He could not help but feel a sense of fear. No! Suddenly, he screamed and rushed out like a madman. The wind became colder as if it came from the underworld. Moreover, traces of the smell of blood were also blown by the cold wind, causing one's nerves to involuntarily tighten. Suddenly, the scene in front of him opened up. He had arrived in a huge rock cave, and many stalactites were hanging upside down above his head like sharp swords. Behind the stalactites was an underground river, and the water surged, creating white splashes. The river kept flowing forward, and it was unknown where it flowed. There were some scattered bones on the ground, and Tang Zheng's heart tightened. He could tell that they were human bones, and there were mottled bloodstains scattered around. This place was like hell on earth, causing people to tremble with fear. "Hee hee, you're finally here." The Imperial Tutor's voice rang out again. He was standing on a high platform not far away, looking down at Tang Zheng from above. "Imperial Tutor, quickly hand over the person." Tang Zheng's eyes were red with anxiety, and he roared in anger. "You want the person, right? As you wish." The Imperial Tutor said with a smile, his eyes flashing like a cunning fox. The Imperial Tutor raised his head, pointed above and said, "Don't you want the person? Isn't that it?" Hearing this, Tang Zheng hurriedly raised his head to look. Where was the person? Seeing Tang Zheng's puzzled expression, the Imperial Tutor reminded him, "Look carefully, aren't those stalactites people?" Tang Zheng was suddenly startled, and looked over. Ah! Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he could not help but let out a cry of surprise. Sure enough, those were not stalactites. They were clearly people hanging upside down, but their bodies were covered by something like crystals, making them unable to move. What exactly is going on?" Tang Zheng asked loudly. "I always forgot to tell you something. Wu Junshan and the others were not captured by me," the Imperial Tutor said mysteriously. Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched. This was a problem he had always ignored. Since he could force the Imperial Tutor with his strength, then with his cultivation, it was impossible for him to take down Wu Junshan and Lan Yu in one fell swoop. One had to know that their strength had already reached the peak of perfection. It was easier said than done to capture them alive. Unless one's cultivation was several levels higher than theirs, it was impossible to succeed. But the fact was that they were captured, so there must be a secret that no one knew. Hearing the Imperial Tutor admit it himself, Tang Zheng hurriedly asked, "Then who captured them?" "Hee hee, when the time comes you will naturally know." The Imperial Tutor deliberately mystified. "You have helpers?" Tang Zheng asked. "Aren't you the legendary #1 expert of the island nation? Other than you, who else can do this?" Tang Zheng's heartbeat quickened. This was beyond his expectations. If the Imperial Tutor had helpers, then wouldn't he be walking right into a trap? You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.